Chapter 1354. Where was Kiki? Was she okay? Was she hurt? Thinking of these questions, Poplar Fruit felt extremely uncomfortable. He even thought in a bad direction. Every time such chaotic thoughts appeared, Poplar Fruit's hands could not help but tremble. It was not a trembling of fear, but of anger. Who was it? Who was it that dared to touch my daughter? Don't let me find out, or I'll tear you apart. Poplar Fruit's emotions were on the verge of collapse. To be precise, his emotional thinking was on the verge of losing control, but he did not lose control because his rational thinking took over his body. So what everyone saw was a Poplar Fruit who was abnormally calm in the face of trouble. He was so calm that it was scary. Lu Yi, Hu Jun, and Lin Yongjian took the children and boarded the plane to leave. Poplar Fruit did not stop them. After all, they were big celebrities and had their own itineraries. Even Zhou Shimin, who wanted to stay behind to accompany Poplar Fruit, was persuaded by Poplar Fruit to go home. Zhou Shimin and the others' concern for Poplar Fruit was remembered by Poplar Fruit, but it was useless for them to stay. The program team temporarily stayed behind. After the initial chaos, they understood the seriousness of the matter and fully cooperated with Poplar Fruit to find Kiki as soon as possible. Poplar Fruit's phone call was not without results. Kaiyun Province's Public Security Bureau Chief Yen Wanxiong was still in his position. After he received Poplar Fruit's call, he immediately gave instructions to Shidan Bana's Public Security Bureau to quickly send police to help find and solve the case. So, in less than 2 hours, Shidan Bana's criminal police unit had Meng Jinglai under control. There were police officers and police dogs everywhere. They were even prepared to mobilize the local experienced forest police to search the mountains. Not only that, Yen Wanxiong would personally come and oversee the battle. Why was he so concerned? This had little to do with his personal relationship with Poplar Fruit. The real reason was still Poplar Fruit and, "Where are we going, Dad?" There was no need to introduce how popular "Where are we going, Dad?" was. Almost everyone in the country had heard of the show, and the filming locations for the first 2 seasons had become popular tourist attractions. Otherwise, why would Shidan Bana be so thick-skinned as to beg them to do a show? As for the guests of "Where are you going, Daddy?" something had happened to them at Kaiyun and Shidan. If news of this spread out, what would others think of this matter? Not to mention the production team, even the local tourism safety issues were being debated over and over again. If everyone felt that Shidan Bana and Kaiyun were not safe, then who would dare to travel to Kaiyun? It must be known that Kaiyun province was not an economic province like Guangdong province. The tourism economy occupied an important part of the province's GDP. Didn't you see that last year's riots eased the tourism in Kaiyun province for a long time until the National Day Golden Week before it recovered? When it came to the terrorist incident, Yang Guo was definitely involved. As the hero of the last terrorist case, as one of this year's top 10 people who touched China, Yang Guo had once again encountered a nasty incident in Kaiyun province. If such an incident were to break out, if Kaiyun province did not put in any effort to help resolve it, how would the people of the country view Kaiyun province? Therefore, with the instructions of the Kaiyun Public Security Department, the criminal police in Shidan Bana took action. However, after searching for a long time, they could not find any clues within a few kilometers. It was a bit like after the gangster attacked Old Lu, he quickly disappeared with Kiki. Yes. Old Lu. Just as Poplar Fruit was holding his mobile phone, silent and tangled about how to tell Fang Beibei about his situation, this matter could not be hidden anymore. It would definitely be breaking news the next day, but he really did not know how to say it. Suddenly, a staff member of the production team ran over in surprise and said to Poplar Fruit, "Teacher Yang, Old Lu woke up." Standing in the darkness outside the house, the tall figure suddenly turned around, and a pair of eyes that were still sharp and terrifying against the light blinked at the staff member. At that moment, the staff member actually felt a sense of suffocation, as if he was being stared at by a fierce tiger deep in the mountains. However, Poplar Fruit quickly hid the ruthlessness in his heart. When the staff member looked again, he could only see a man who was still gentle and reserved. He thought that his eyes were playing tricks on him. "Let's go. Let's go and take a look," Poplar Fruit said softly. Although he restrained his anger, Poplar Fruit still felt like he was 1,000 miles away. When they arrived at Meng Jinglai's infirmary, old Lu, whose head was bandaged, was lying there, being examined by the nurse. He had been unconscious for more than 3 hours, but fortunately, he did not have a concussion. "Teacher Yang." Although he was older than Poplar Fruit, old Lu still respectfully addressed Poplar Fruit as Teacher Yang. When he saw Poplar Fruit come in, he struggled to get up and said apologetically, "I'm sorry, I didn't fulfill my responsibility to take care of her." After he woke up, someone told him the general situation. Old Lu did not dare to face Poplar Fruit. He wished he could find a hole in the ground to hide in. It was all his fault. Why did he volunteer to take Kiki out without her father's company? Poplar Fruit reached out and held old Lu down. He sighed and said softly, "Old Lu, I don't blame you. This happened too strangely, too suddenly. It's not your fault." He looked into old Lu's eyes and said seriously, "When I found you, the camera was still stolen. But I believe you should have seen the person who took Kiki away. It was when you were blocking." Poplar Fruit raised his hand and made a blocking gesture. Then, he pointed at old Lu's injured arm. He looked at old Lu expectantly and said, "Old Lu, I need you. Can you recall what that person looked like?" 3 hours had passed. Although the Shidanbana police were searching, they did not find any clues. Perhaps there was still a chance if they continued to search, but Poplar Fruit felt that the longer they delayed, the more difficult it was to predict Kiki's safety. His daughter had not eaten dinner yet. Would she be hungry now? She just took a shower and did not wear a coat. Would she catch a cold at night? Thinking of all this, Poplar Fruit's heart ached as if it was being torn apart. Yes, it could not be delayed any longer. Currently, the most promising person was old Lu. He was the only one who had seen the criminal. It was very likely that they could find a breakthrough from him. Old Lu did not have a concussion, but he was hit in the head with a stick. Now, his head was splitting. But he gritted his teeth and tried hard to recall the memory of that moment. It was all his fault. Thinking of the kind and lovely girl, old Lu was full of guilt. He wanted to make up for it. Suddenly, old Lu's mind seemed to have a flash of light. He desperately tried to grasp and grasp. Suddenly, his eyes widened and he shouted, "I know, it's him." Chapter 1355. I know, it's him. Old Lu's words were like a shooting star across the night sky, making Poplar Fruit excited. He was excited. Yes, I guessed right. Old Lu must have seen the guy's face. It was as if he had grabbed onto a life-saving straw. He was so excited that he wanted to walk forward, but the captain of the Zidanbana Public Security Bureau was even more excited than him. He suddenly jumped out and asked, "Mr. Lu, do you know the criminal who committed the crime? Is he a staff member of the program?" "No, he's not from our program." Old Lu waved his hand, but looked at Poplar Fruit and said, "Mr. Yang, do you remember the person we met in the mountains yesterday?" "The person we met in the mountains?" Old Lu's description was not very clear, but Poplar Fruit's pupils shrank slightly. He asked sternly, "The person who suddenly appeared in front of us and asked for directions? Did he kidnap Kiki?" Old Lu said seriously, "Yes. It's most likely him." At that time, I thought he looked familiar, but I was immediately stunned. But now, the more I think about it, the more I realize that he looks like that person. He just changed into black clothes. Were you also recording the program yesterday? Although the captain of the criminal police unit did not know much about it, he quickly sorted out the messy and complicated relationships among them. He immediately grasped the main point. Then, can we get the image of that person by looking at the content recorded before? Suddenly, a passageway like a highway was placed in front of everyone. They were like headless flies, bumping around for more than 3 hours, and finally found a clue. Yes, police comrade, we have copies of all the videos recorded that day. We can get them for you right away. Producer Sia had been holding back for a long time, and finally had a chance to show off. Poplar Fruit was frighteningly calm at this time. He nodded and said, but we have 5 cameras, and 5 motion cameras pinned to our chests. There must be several that can take a clear and complete picture of him. There was one thing that Poplar Fruit didn't say. Even without the camera, he could have drawn the villager with the help of the Public Security Bureau's sketch expert. After all, his memory was as accurate as a hard drive. It was almost effortless to find the criminal's appearance from the footage. With the help of so many cameras, if there was time, they could even create a 3D portrait of the criminal from all angles. Of course, their time was very precious. The criminal police team quickly selected the clearest photo and distributed it, so that the Shidanbana city wanted this person. In the end, in less than 10 minutes, there was a new clue. It was actually provided by the villagers from Mengjing. When they saw the photo in the hands of the criminal police, they exclaimed, "Isn't this Xiao Wu, Mr. Ruan's son?" Ruan Laofa's name was Ruan Xinfa. He was also a Dai, so the villagers were used to calling him Ruan Laofa. Mr. Ruan had passed away a month ago. Xiao Wu was his 5th son. No one remembered his name because he had not learned well since he was young. He spent every day with some shady people. Later on, he heard that he went to Myanmar to mingle in the underworld. Because of Ruan Laofa's death, he specially came back to visit his family. It was actually a villager. He even came back from Myanmar. The criminal police suddenly became alert. They immediately rushed over and searched the Ruan family, but they didn't find anything. There were police everywhere in Mengjing, so why would they stay there and wait for you to catch them? However, the Ruan family showed a very subtle attitude. It took an hour for the criminal police to interrogate them and find out the reason. It turned out that the Ruan family's relationship with Ruan Xiao Wu wasn't good. What else could it be? It must be the family property. The Ruan family had 5 children. The rest were farmers or businessmen. Only Ruan Xiao Wu didn't learn well. He went to Myanmar more than 10 years ago. Then, except for a few communications a year, he never came back. In the end, when Mr. Ruan died, he came back. Didn't he want to divide the Ruan family property? Because of Ruan Xiao Wu's unfilial behavior, Mr. Ruan didn't give him any property in his will. Although the 4 brothers were dutiful, they weren't stupid. Who would be willing to divide the family property? Mengjinglai was an important tourist attraction in Shidanbana. Running a business here was a good thing to make 100 profits. The 4 brothers were already tight with the property. Who would be willing to have Ruan Xiao Wu, who had never stayed at home, come back and get a share? Well, regardless of these people's property disputes, Ruan Xiao Wu came back a few days ago after he came back once last month. He didn't make a big fuss about dividing the property. Instead, he stayed in a low-key way, saying that he was going to watch the 7th day for his father. After the day passed, he would return to Myanmar. This made the criminal police feel very strange. Was this a case of kidnapping hostages for ransom because the property wasn't going well? However, the clues that surfaced were very strange. Ruan Xiao Wu didn't make a fuss, but the 4 brothers of the Ruan family were very resistant. That means there's something fishy. Finally, a person beside Yen Wanxiong, the head of the Kaiyun Public Security Department, said seriously. He was the most famous case-solving expert in Kaiyun province. This time, Yen Wanxiong brought him over to quickly find clues to solve the case. Poplar Fruit also felt that it wasn't that simple, but he couldn't tell why. Administrator Zong pointed to Ruan Xiao Wu's photo on the blackboard and said, "Let's assume that Ruan Xiao Wu learned that Dad's program crew was coming over to film a month ago. From then on, he had the idea of committing a crime. Then, after Dad's crew confirmed that they were coming, he came back to Mengjing. This time coincided with the arrival of Poplar Fruit. In addition, from the confession, it can be seen that Wan Xiaowu is very low-key. Why is he low-key? It's because he goes out early and returns late every day. No one knows his whereabouts. Is this what a person who wants to observe mourning for his father would do? I don't believe it. And Wan Xiaowu happened to appear on the route that Poplar Fruit and the others were exploring. He didn't make a move on other children who were easier and more famous. Instead, he deliberately targeted Kiki, who had a powerful father like Poplar Fruit. All the clues point to one point. This case has been premeditated for a long time. Moreover, it's aimed at Kiki, or rather, at Poplar Fruit. Administrator Zong said seriously. He turned to look at Yan Wanxiong and didn't look at Poplar Fruit sitting next to him. He said softly, Director Yan, this is Meng Jing. It's only 5 kilometers away from Myanmar. Yan Wanxiong suddenly became serious and asked, You're saying that it's related to the group of people last year? Chapter 1356. Are you kidding me? Poplar Fruit doesn't have money? If people heard Poplar Fruit's inner monologue, they would think that it was ridiculous. As the most profitable translator in history, not to mention his shares, Yang Guo had sold at least 70 to 80 books through the new translation route. He had more than 10 books on the global bestseller list. Every year, he could bring in hundreds of millions of yuan in wealth. How could Poplar Fruit not have money? But that was the truth. Poplar Fruit didn't even have more than 10 million in his bank account. Where did the rest of the money go? 70% of his income was donated to the Distance Education Charity Fund. Although distance education was supported by the government, the charity fund still played its role. Every year during winter and summer vacations, university students from all over the country would go to the mountainous areas to have in-depth exchanges with children. These expenses were all jointly funded by the charity fund and various universities. 10% was donated to Fong Beibei's Stray Cat and Dog Rescue Center. Even though the Stray Cat and Dog Rescue Center was supported by the pet hospital, the expenses were still not small. After all, other than the stray cat and dog food, there was also the maintenance of the website, travel subsidies for volunteers, and interviews with adoptive families. These were all reasons why the rescue center could not make ends meet. Even though Fong Beibei didn't expand the rescue center outside of Yangcheng, due to her and many other outstanding volunteers' hard work, the rescue center formed a very strict and scientific rescue, promotion, and adoption system. This was well known throughout the country. Many similar organizations in Beijing and Shanghai would visit the rescue center to learn from them. As for the rest of the money, Yang Guo had secretly donated a lot of money. For example, she had donated a lot of money to help the poor families who were killed in the Kunming incident last year. For example, she had donated a lot of money to help the firefighters who were killed in the Jincheng port explosion this year. Therefore, the remaining money for Poplar Fruit was not much. It was less than 10%. Of course, compared to ordinary people, 10% was an indescribable amount of wealth. You could buy a mansion in Yangcheng. But even though Poplar Fruit had done so many good deeds, when it was his turn to need money, even 100 million was not enough. This feeling was not despair, but a deep sense of helplessness and frustration. Needless to say, the robbers who kidnapped Kiki must have thought that he was rich after seeing how much money Poplar Fruit had donated. That was why they had opened their mouths. No matter what, Poplar Fruit first asked Yan Wanxiong to help find a local bank to raise 2 million in cash. Normally, 2 million in cash would require 2 suitcases and a duffel bag. If Poplar Fruit went alone, he would be able to carry it all by himself. Next, Poplar Fruit had to figure out how to borrow the remaining 100 million. Yes, Poplar Fruit wanted to borrow 100 million from someone, but the first person he thought of was Zheng Yujie. That was a bit ironic, wasn't it? Poplar Fruit kept Zheng Yujie's feelings deep in his heart every time. Every time, he made a cruel decision for her. Even after Zheng Yujie turned 20, every time she cried, it was because of him. But how did Zheng Yujie feel about him? She supported him unswervingly. When he was raising Kiki, Jing Yujie brought him onto the path of literary translation. When he was a nobody, Jing Yujie created opportunities for him to become famous all over the world. When he met Ardal and Mo Yen, he was with Jing Yujie. Even when she and Poplar Fruit started a company, she didn't hesitate to share the biggest cake with him. But now? Poplar Fruit drove her away in anger, and they even fell into a cold war. Jing Yujie came to Shidan Bana because of him. His first thought was to borrow money from Jing Yujie. However, Poplar Fruit didn't seem to have any other choice except Jing Yujie. He had a good relationship with Ardal and Yao Dehua, but they weren't close enough to lend him 100 million. Not to mention Xiao Bei and Alan from the United States. Even if they were willing, they couldn't lend him 100 million in liquid funds in a short time. It was too difficult to do so in one day. The only possibility was through Jing Yujie. Don't get me wrong. Jing Yujie didn't have so much liquid funds. She had invested all her funds in the new translation business. But her aunt was rich. Poplar Fruit frowned, but he smiled bitterly in his heart. I'm going to owe her a favor again. Yes, when his daughter was in trouble, Poplar Fruit would still speak up, no matter how difficult it was to do so. As for Jing Yujie, Poplar Fruit believed that if he spoke up, Jing Yujie would help him without hesitation. This was the tacit understanding formed between the two after 4 years of cooperation. They were more than friends, but not yet lovers. It was so strange. In Shidan Bana, they were still trying their best to track down the whereabouts of the bandits. The previous video investigation had found the small pickup truck that the bandits had escaped from Meng Jinglai, but after that, there was no trace of them. Administrator Zong speculated that it was very likely that the bandits had escaped into the forest overnight. However, Shidan Bana was so big. The forest covered an area of nearly 20 million mu. It was not something that could be found by using human wave tactics. Yan Wanxiong looked at Poplar Fruit from time to time. When they worked together on the terrorism case last year, Poplar Fruit had left a deep impression on him, but it was far less shocking than today's. At first, when he saw Poplar Fruit, he thought that Poplar Fruit didn't have a deep relationship with his daughter. Otherwise, why would he be so expressionless? But when Poplar Fruit saw the scene of tears in the video, it overturned his impression. It was not that Poplar Fruit didn't have deep feelings for his daughter, but that they were too deep. But Poplar Fruit controlled himself like a robot. He was terrifyingly calm. Yan Wanxiong even inadvertently noticed that Poplar Fruit couldn't help but emit a cold aura. If he was a veteran, he would know that it wasn't a cold aura that came from anger, but a murderous aura that came from anger. In this world, only vicious people and veterans who coldly reap the lives of many enemies would have such a cold aura. But no matter what, Poplar Fruit's cold and unapproachable attitude made even Yan Wanxiong dare not disturb him. When he was at his wit's end, Jing Yujie and Fang Beibei finally arrived. You didn't see wrong, Jing Yujie and Fang Beibei did arrive at the same time. He Wenjue, Yang Jingdong, and of course, Meng Sanhua, who were in their military uniforms, followed behind them. Bro, you didn't ask me for help when such a big thing happened. You really don't respect me as your brother. He Wenjue patted Poplar Fruit's shoulder and said reproachfully. He didn't laugh, but only comforted him. Don't be afraid, your brothers are here to help you. What was going on? Looking at Fang Beibei who threw herself into his arms, and Jing Yujie who stood there with reddened eyes, Poplar Fruit was confused. Chapter 1357. The video of Chi-Chi being kidnapped went viral on the internet. Although it was quickly deleted by the internet police, this matter was completely blown out of proportion. The internet was in an uproar, and the safety of the little girl affected the hearts of many people. Of course, most people could only silently light candles and repost it. Other than showing their kindness and care, it was of no use to the investigation of the case. However, there were always some media outlets that were very annoying. They kept harassing the people around Poplar Fruit, and even the other 4 guests who had already returned home. Other than constantly criticizing the program, "Where are you, Dad?" and using some of the past experiences of kidnapping and killing to gain attention, they did not seem to have any good intentions. Instead, they seemed to be gloating more. Of course, what the outside world was like had nothing to do with Poplar Fruit. At this time, he was not in the mood to care about social media. His phone was also with the police technicians. If the criminals called in, he might be able to seize the opportunity to locate them. While Wenjua was carefully watching the video of the criminals, Poplar Fruit came in front of Fong Beibei and Jing Yujie. Although there were still sparkling tears on Fong Beibei's eyelashes, she also straightened her chest and pretended to be brave, striving not to be a burden to Poplar Fruit. Jing Yujie also pursed her lips, unwilling to look at Poplar Fruit. It was not that she did not dare, nor was it because the two of them had been estranged from the Cold War for nearly a month. It was mainly because she could not help but reveal her emotions when looking at Poplar Fruit. In front of Fong Beibei, this made her feel very awkward. The two girls were more or less haggard. After all, they had been frightened early in the morning, and then their spirits had been tense for half a day. Moreover, the military flight was fast and bumpy, and the poor quality boys would be airsick. After such a long time, not to mention Fong Beibei, Jing Yujie's face was a little pale, as if she was malnourished. Poplar Fruit lovingly helped Fong Beibei brush her hair and gently said, "I'm sorry, baby. Right now, I really don't have the energy to care too much. Sometimes, you have to suffer." This grievance was not only because of the negligence of the higher-ups, but also because of Jing Yujie's dilemma. Although it was true that Poplar Fruit and Jing Yujie were not together, it was an indisputable fact that Jing Yujie liked Poplar Fruit and had been chasing after him. Fong Beibei was not as noisy as she was at the beginning. Instead, she had been tolerating him, which made Poplar Fruit feel even more guilty. Therefore, when Poplar Fruit said this, Fong Beibei couldn't help but shed a few more tears, which were gently wiped away by Poplar Fruit's finger. Of course, seeing that Poplar Fruit treated Fong Beibei so well, how could Jing Yujie not feel wronged? Poplar Fruit saw that her eyes gradually turned red, but Jing Yujie didn't cry. She forced herself to hold back the tears in her eyes. Poplar Fruit, of course, felt a little uncomfortable, but he couldn't be as gentle to Jing Yujie as he was to Fong Beibei. After thinking about it, Poplar Fruit sighed and said helplessly, "Yujie, I have something that I need your help with." In the end, he still had to say it. He didn't beat around the bush. When talking to Jing Yujie, he was used to being straightforward. "Say it." Jing Yujie nodded and said, "I want to borrow money from you." Poplar Fruit gritted his teeth and prepared to say the amount. "Oh. You have no money in your card," Fong Beibei exclaimed. She also suddenly remembered that the robbers wanted a huge ransom of 120 million yuan. Although she didn't have Poplar Fruit's money in her hands, Poplar Fruit never hid his income from her. Fong Beibei could roughly calculate how much money he had left. "Yes, I want to borrow 94 million yuan from you," Poplar Fruit said with some loneliness. "In addition to 2 million yuan in cash, I only have a little more than 6 million yuan left. The difference is too big." Jing Yujie opened her mouth. She originally wanted to question Poplar Fruit. "Where did you take the money that I gave you before?" This wasn't a pure question, but a question that was close to a rhetorical question, because Jing Yujie knew the general answer. But she didn't say that Poplar Fruit was already very uncomfortable at this moment. Jing Yujie couldn't bear to agitate him anymore. So Jing Yujie kept a straight face, nodded, and said, "Okay, it will take some time. Wait for my reply. I will find someone to raise the money for you now." Close to 100 million yuan. Even if it was her aunt, this amount of liquid capital would have to be divided among several companies. It couldn't be provided by one company. If that happened, the capital chain would be broken and it would be a big problem. Jing Yujie didn't ask for anything. She didn't even ask about the interest rate, repayment time, and so on. She simply agreed and turned to walk to the balcony. Poplar Fruit looked at Jing Yujie's elegant and neat back. He couldn't help but be a little stunned. Of course, not long after, he withdrew his gaze and looked at Fong Beibei beside him. Fong Beibei was also a little nervous. She even looked at him with some sadness. Poplar Fruit actually understood Fong Beibei's thoughts. She suddenly felt that the gap between her and Zheng Yujie was very big. It was just like when she quarreled with Zheng Yujie. Zheng Yujie's question lingered in her ears, "What's the use of you?" When Poplar Fruit was at his most helpless, her usefulness was almost zero. On the other hand, Zheng Yujie could find a private jet and help raise such a huge amount of ransom for Poplar Fruit. Suddenly, Fong Beibei's heart sank and felt sad. Although she had already registered her marriage with Poplar Fruit, she always felt that she could only act cute occasionally to please her husband. It was really useless. Silly, thinking nonsense again? Poplar Fruit gently patted Fong Beibei's head. Now that he was in a bad mood, it was difficult for him to do such an intimate action like wiggling his nose. However, he still had to comfort her. He said softly, "Don't think too much. What you need to do is to trust me." Trust him? Poplar Fruit actually didn't know. Of course, this wasn't talking about the emotional dispute between him and Zheng Yujie. Poplar Fruit's thoughts couldn't help but drift back to Kiki. He still didn't know whether his daughter was alive or dead. He wanted to save her and even use his own life to exchange for his daughter's safety, but he didn't know where to start. He couldn't find her. Because of his daughter, Poplar Fruit really didn't have much energy to care about Fong Beibei's feelings. Fong Beibei actually understood. She also suppressed the sour worry in her heart and gently pushed Poplar Fruit. She wiped away her tears and said, "Don't worry about me. Go do your work. If there's any good news, let me know." Poplar Fruit looked at Fong Beibei, who was sitting quietly on the sofa next to him. She waved her hand to indicate that she was fine. He Wenjua nodded and went back to the conference room where He Wenjua had watched the video. "Brother, is there any good news?" Poplar Fruit asked softly. Because of Fong Beibei's arrival, although Poplar Fruit was still terrifyingly calm, the coldness that kept people 1,000 miles away had lessened a lot. "Yes." He Wenjua raised his head and looked at Poplar Fruit with a serious expression. He said, "I just watched the video and compared it with a piece of information I received before. I don't think it's that simple." Chapter 1358. Things weren't that simple. What exactly was going on? Poplar Fruit sat down next to He Wenjua and listened carefully to his analysis. The people from Kaiyun province weren't here. Although Administrator Zone was an old criminal police officer, he still had a little pride. He didn't think that a few soldiers who only knew how to use machine guns and cannons would be able to analyze anything. "Just now, Poplar Fruit, did you say that this person's accent was Shishan?" He Wenjua pointed to the masked bandit on the screen and asked. "The accent is very light. Maybe he's been outside for a long time, but it's hard to change the accent." "I still heard it." Poplar Fruit nodded. Looking at his pitiful daughter in the video, he couldn't help but feel sad. However, he still didn't change his expression, as if he was watching a movie that had nothing to do with him. "The bank robbery case 4 years ago, do you still remember that I told you that the interrogation results later found that they weren't ordinary bank robbers, but drug dealers from the north?" He Wenjua said. Why did he suddenly mention them? No matter how calm Poplar Fruit was, he couldn't help but breathe faster. He looked sternly at the robber in the video and asked doubtfully, "Big brother, do you mean that the people who kidnapped Kiki are the same group of people?" "I'm not completely sure. And even if they are, it's not the same group of people." He Wenjua analyzed, "There are 3 reasons why I think it might be them. First, the place where they sold drugs was in Shishan. The Shishan police arrested all of them. Only the 4 suspects escaped by train." He Wenjua said. In this way, the Shishan accent was very suspicious. Didn't Lu DePeo also have a Shishan accent? If the only suspect who escaped from the bank robbery case was also from Shishan, then it was very likely that he came back to seek revenge. However, this reason was too far-fetched. Wenjua continued to analyze. Second, didn't I tell you that one of them escaped? We've been tracking them for a long time, but we haven't found out where they escaped to. But it's very likely that we've made a mistake. Wenjua said seriously, we thought their boss was from Thailand, so he should have escaped to Thailand. But what if he didn't go to Thailand? Back then, the kidnappers had told him that they were in Thailand, but the dinghy had never returned. It was very likely that the escaped suspect had killed them. Then, Wenjua's deduction was very likely to be true. Don't be fooled by the fact that these people are involved in kidnapping and extortion now. Yan Wanxiong just said that they relied on the support of the warlords and started their business through drug trafficking. It was only after Peng Jiasheng came back a few years ago and emphasized the prohibition of drugs again to win the hearts of the people that they turned to kidnapping and extortion. Wenjua went straight to the point, and the person who escaped back then, wasn't he a big drug lord? Poplar Fruit frowned. It seemed that a lot of clues pointed to Wenjua's speculation. But, in this case, what was originally a simple kidnapping, coupled with this unknown hatred, became very complicated. If it wasn't a kidnapping, but a follow-up revenge of the bank robbery 4 years ago, Poplar Fruit felt that even if he paid the ransom, Kiki's life wouldn't be guaranteed. Wenjua wasn't done yet. He pulled up a screenshot of the surveillance video on the computer and pointed to the person in the video. He said, this is the suspect who escaped back then. He's very anti-reconnaissance, so you can't see his face from the surveillance video. But, you can compare his size. Isn't he similar to this masked man? The body shape could change, but the size wouldn't, unless it shrank with age. But, it wouldn't change much in 4 years. Although the angle was biased, Poplar Fruit could see that the height of the two people should be about the same. Poplar Fruit rubbed his eyebrows tiredly. He didn't sleep yesterday, so it didn't affect him too much. But, worrying about Kiki and constantly analyzing all kinds of information consumed too much of Poplar Fruit's energy. Even with the Nigong slowly nourishing his body, Poplar Fruit's energy was somewhat difficult to sustain. However, even if Poplar Fruit and the others were here to guess blindly, they couldn't do anything to the criminals. Because, until now, Poplar Fruit and the others still couldn't figure out their whereabouts. However, there was a new direction to solve the case. This might allow Administrator Zong and other experienced criminal police to find some clues. So, when Poplar Fruit and Wenjua repeated the analysis to the police in Kaiyun, Administrator Zong rushed out again. Yan Wanxiong frowned. Although he was the director, he used to be a criminal investigator. So, when he encountered a big case, he was always interested in commanding. But this time, the police in Kaiyun lost face. A living person disappeared just like that. They used so many police and manpower, but they didn't save my daughter. Yan Wanxiong was stressed. It wasn't just the pressure of public opinion, but also because of the huge social impact caused by this incident. The higher-ups also ordered him to quickly solve the case and ensure the safety of the hostage. If it's still within Kaiyun, then it's fine. If it's really outside the country, we can only watch. Yan Wanxiong said gloomily. The police couldn't go, and the soldiers of the army couldn't go in large numbers. That was equivalent to a declaration of war between countries. If it's outside the country, then let us do it. The weapons we brought this time are not standard, and there are few people, so the target is not big. Myanmar won't find out. Don't worry, Director Yen. Wenjua said. He found that he really came to the right place. If necessary, I will apply to the higher-ups, and also transfer a few people from our special forces to help. Yan Wanxiong said. If they went to Myanmar, it wouldn't necessarily be a matter of a dozen people. Maybe, they would have to face the size of a small army. No matter what, when the time comes, please be sure to protect Kiki's safety. Poplar Fruit said, and pulled out the 2 miaodao from the backpack. His expression was as calm as ice. While wiping the blades, he said softly, you don't have to worry about me. All the tactical arrangements are to rescue the hostage. I'm counting on everyone. Looking at Poplar Fruit bowing in the cold light of the two Miaodao, Yan Wanxiong's eyelids trembled. He knew that the person in front of him was not an easy person to deal with. Jing Yujie walked back with a tired face and said to Poplar Fruit, "You don't have to worry about the money. Give me those 10 accounts. I'll get someone to prepare them first." "Thank you, Yujie." Poplar Fruit bowed again. This attitude made Jing Yujie frown. She felt uncomfortable, as if the Poplar Fruit in front of her had changed into a different person. She paused and turned to find Fong Beibei. Fong Beibei and Poplar Fruit had lived together for so long. She was probably the only one who could make Poplar Fruit normal. "I'm fine." Poplar Fruit shook his head. His hands held the handle of the Miaodao, sometimes exerting force, sometimes relaxing. He seemed to want to increase his fighting strength right now. The coldness of the Miaodao was getting stronger and stronger. This was because the Miaodao was bloodthirsty. "Uncle." Fong Beibei's soft little hand pressed on the back of Poplar Fruit's hand. Her voice made Poplar Fruit sober up a little. The beautiful girl's figure gradually became clearer. He had entered a state just now. "You didn't rest yesterday. Why don't you go and sleep first?" Fong Beibei had a deeper understanding of Poplar Fruit's body. She gently advised, "There are still 10 hours. Before that, you can't ruin yourself. Go sleep, adjust your state, and then go rescue Kiki. Then we'll settle the score with those bad people, okay?" Fong Beibei's persuasion had an effect in the end. Poplar Fruit did show signs of qi deviation because of his overthinking just now. Fortunately, he escaped in time. He closed his eyes tiredly. Without looking, he directly sheathed the dual blades. When he opened his eyes again, there were already some fluctuations of humanity. "I'm going to sleep. If you have any new developments, no matter big or small, please be sure to wake me up." Poplar Fruit finally looked at Fong Beibei. He hoped that Fong Beibei could understand his meaning. "Don't worry." Fong Beibei took Poplar Fruit's hand and hugged one of his hands to her chest. She looked at him worriedly. Poplar Fruit directly slept in the conference room with his clothes on. To be honest, he could not sleep, but Poplar Fruit forced himself to sleep. So tired. Poplar Fruit, who had been going smoothly for the past 4 years, felt physically and mentally exhausted for the first time. Why did he feel so powerless for the first time? Chapter 1359. For those who don't remember this foreshadowing, you can read chapters 123 to 132. Water, everywhere was a vast and boundless ocean. The cold gazes of the smuggler and paparazzi on the sampan. When he swung his knife, it turned out to be his boss's gaze. Huff, huff, huff. It was that messy dream again. The smoker squinted his eyes. His mind was still in a daze. His hands trembled as he took out a packet of powder from the pistol beside his pillow. He opened it and pressed one side of his nose to inhale the powder. Some of the powder scattered, but the smoker didn't pay much attention to it. He still had a lot of it. What was there to be afraid of? It had been a long time since he had this dream. That cold night when he was running away in a panic seemed so real in his dreams. The world was spinning after he inhaled the powder. The smoker realized that his memories had become clearer. He still remembered the failed bank robbery. He didn't know why, but his boss, Su Pan, and Lu DePeo all died inside. Because he was waiting outside, he saw that the situation wasn't good and slipped away quickly, so he was able to escape. The small sampan set off on time, but the smoking addict was the only one left out of the original group of 4. It wasn't because of their brotherhood that he was reluctant to leave. If those guys were caught alive, they would definitely betray him, so he could only escape. However, after the sampan passed Nanyue, the smoker suddenly didn't want to go to Thailand. Because he went to Thailand, he was unfamiliar with the place and did not know Thai like Lu DePeo. The only possibility was to seek refuge with the boss's family. However, the boss and Su Pan both died in China while he survived. It was obvious that he would die if he went there. So, he decided to go to Myanmar. The smoker was left outside not because he was weak, but because he was smart. He was good at providing support. He was even the one who contacted the smuggler. Every snake had its own way of doing things. The smoker was very good at dealing with people. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that he was good at dealing with people. Why did he want to go to Myanmar? Because he didn't know any other languages. If he went to Myanmar, there would be a bunch of Chinese who spoke Mandarin. First, he would turn from guest to host. The smoker had a good plan. But the smoking addict was in trouble right from the start. The man from the smuggler's head told him that he could go to Myanmar, but the price would be 10 times higher. Seeing that Smoke Ghost was alone, he wanted to take advantage of him. But how could the cigarette addict accept this? He feigned civility and secretly seized an opportunity to pull out the dagger hidden in the bottom of his shoe. He stabbed the henchman from behind, then picked up the gun and took control of the sampan. When they reached Myanmar, the smoking addict was just as ruthless. He killed all the boatmen and sailors on the sampan. He didn't even leave the ship behind. After sinking it, he pushed it into the sea. He wanted to cut off any clues that could lead to him being tracked down and captured. He knew that based on the crimes he had committed in the West Mountains, 100 deaths were enough. In the end, the smoker found a warlord in Myanmar and used his wits to get into their most secretive and profitable drug business. Then, relying on his ruthlessness, he directly replaced the original leader the next year and pulled the local Chinese to establish a new force. The smoking addict was called the smoking addict because he sold and used poison himself. After becoming the leader, it was fortunate that he restrained himself. Otherwise, he would probably have died from overdosing like the previous leader. But good times didn't last long. Peng Jiaxing came back, and the enforcement of drug prohibition became stricter. The smoking addict's small team was no match for the king of Guagan. He could only tuck his tail between his legs. But without the huge profits of the drug business, the smoking addict couldn't support so many people. But the smoking addict was a smart person. He gathered his team again and started kidnapping and extorting people. Although it wasn't as profitable as the drug business, it still made a lot of money. Plus, he didn't have to work too hard to make a lot of money. Just as his brothers on the mountain were happily enjoying the life of luxury brought by the ransom, the smoking addict keenly realized that this kind of life wouldn't last long. He already had thoughts of retreating, but before that, he had to settle his brothers down. He couldn't just leave like that. If he publicly said that he didn't want to do it, someone would kill him in minutes and take over. The Golden Triangle was such a cruel place. Warlords fought and drug lords ran rampant. At the very least, the smoking addict had to exchange enough benefits for his subordinates before he could leave safely. At this time, the smoking addict, who often watched domestic TV series online, found poplar fruit on a domestic website. Moreover, he was also surprised to find that Yang Guo was the guy who had caused him to flee in panic and wander about in misery. The smoking addict wanted revenge, but of course, it wasn't for the 3 brothers from 4 years ago. It was for himself. The failure back then was like an inner demon shrouding him. A few years ago, he still dreamed about the failure of the bank robbery every day. Plus, he found out that poplar fruit was also a rich person. If he could donate so much money, it was reasonable for him to share some of the money for himself. But after thinking about it for a long time, the smoking addict still didn't know where to start. He wanted to bring his men back to the country to cause trouble for poplar fruit, but that wasn't realistic. If dozens of people were to sneak back, they would probably be killed by the great border guards at the border. It wasn't safe for just a few people. More importantly, he had heard that the border guards in Guangdong were very strict, and there were people in Thailand who were investigating him. He could only give up. The smoking addict had always been paying attention to the news on the internet. He didn't expect that after half a year, poplar fruit would come knocking on his door. First, the 5 big wolves went home to visit their parents and found out where their father went to film in Mengjing. At that time, the smoking addict was excited. He immediately gathered his brothers to discuss countermeasures. He just spread the news that Poplar Fruit was a billionaire who could make them a lot of money. His subordinates were as excited as if they had been injected with chicken blood. Someone said that 100 million was too little. They might as well kidnap Poplar Fruit and make him use all his wealth to buy his life. The smoking addict smiled bitterly. Kidnapping Poplar Fruit, they really dared to think about it. Back then, the 3 of them, Boss, Su Pan, and Lu DePeo, who had guns, couldn't handle Poplar Fruit alone. How could they have the strength to deal with Poplar Fruit? The most important thing was that they couldn't bring all their brothers and arms to cross the border to commit the crime. Intimidated by Poplar Fruit's strength, the smoking addict came up with a new strategy, which was to kidnap his daughter. Therefore, a carefully prepared kidnapping plan was brought out. They followed, caught, kidnapped, escaped, blackmailed, ransomed, and so on. They had a chance to do it on the first day, but there were too many people walking around at that time, and the 5 big wolves weren't 100% sure. The next day, in the mountains, the 5 big wolves couldn't get close to the camp. Kiki wasn't alone, and there were armed forest policemen in the team to ensure the safety of the guests. Finally, on the 3rd day, when Poplar Fruit wasn't paying attention, the 5 big wolves finally succeeded. They didn't even need to use the last trump card of more than a dozen armed forces. Administrator Zong guessed right. That night, they sneaked back to Myanmar through the Luo River, leaving no chance for the Cayenne police to find them. Of course, there was still one person who stayed in Shidanbana. He was responsible for receiving the video from Myanmar and uploading it to the internet. Then, he used a local phone card to send instructions to Poplar Fruit. In this way, Poplar Fruit couldn't know that the next step was to go to Myanmar, so the police were left outside the border. Why would they be afraid of a Poplar Fruit with dozens of guns? This was a kidnapping plan that the smoking addict had spent a month to come up with. He proudly said to his men, "Look at my head, it's flawless." Chapter 1360. Deep in the mountains and forests, although it was quiet and dark, and there was no movement of any creatures, it was terrible, as if it was a horror scene in a movie. Poplar Fruit seemed to be the incarnation of a magical existence that could integrate with everything in the world. One moment, he was wandering on a deserted path, and the next moment, he seemed to be floating in the sky, overlooking the world below. Where is this? Poplar Fruit floated in the air for a while in a daze. Suddenly, he heard a weak cry for help in the wind. "Papa, help me. Kiki." In an instant, Poplar Fruit felt as if his blood was flowing backward, and his head suddenly swelled. He remembered that he was here to save his daughter. Where is Kiki? Where is Kiki? Poplar Fruit floated like a ghost and bumped around like a headless fly. But no matter how hard he bumped, he could not find any trace of his daughter. He wanted to follow the sound, but the cry for help was like a surround sound speaker. It came from all directions, and he could not find the source at all. Look, look! But he did not see a single figure. Not to mention a figure, even a living thing could not be seen. Even the towering trees seemed to be lifeless. Poplar Fruit found that he was getting tired quickly. Gradually, the more he floated, the more tired he became. But he was still looking. Even if he was tired to death, he would find his daughter who was crying and calling for her father. Finally, he saw a shabby factory hidden in the vast mountains. He did not know what it was manufacturing, but it was enough to make Poplar Fruit happy. After searching for a long time, he found a place where there might be people. Maybe his daughter was inside. Poplar Fruit's mental state was a little strange at the moment. It was as if he had gone crazy. He did not care whether there were enemies inside or not, and rushed in recklessly. Kiki! Kiki! Suddenly, Poplar Fruit saw a window. Through the window, he could see his daughter tied to a chair miserably, just like what he saw in the video. But she was even more haggard. She hadn't rested well and hadn't eaten well. Her little face was almost as thin as an oval face. Before she was tied up, her hair, which had been washed clean, was now dirty. Her arms and ankles were a little red and swollen because of the hemp rope. Seeing this, Poplar Fruit was so distressed that tears almost flowed out of his eyes. But strangely, Poplar Fruit could not cry. Kiki was locked up alone. Strangely, there was not a single enemy guarding the entire factory. But Poplar Fruit didn't care whether it was strange or not. He just wanted to untie the rope and save his daughter. However, his previously invincible and intangible body couldn't even pass through a small iron door. Poplar Fruit angrily pounded on the iron door with his fist, but the iron door did not budge. Even the sound of knocking could not be heard. It was as silent as the surroundings. Of course, even if he didn't care whether his body could take it or not, he wouldn't feel any pain. What a strange feeling. But gradually, he became desperate. It was close at hand, but it seemed to be at the end of the world. Poplar Fruit clung to the window, but he couldn't even break the thin window. He could only struggle to call his daughter, but he couldn't make any sound. He gradually went crazy. Papa, boo-hoo, is it Papa? Kiki seemed to feel something. The little girl raised her tear-stained face and looked at the window where Poplar Fruit was struggling. But her eyes seemed to pass through Poplar Fruit and didn't stop. It's Papa. It's Papa. Kiki, don't be afraid. Papa is coming to save you. Poplar Fruit shouted in his heart. But he couldn't break through the thin wall. His heart was full of hope, but it gradually turned into despair. Suddenly, he heard a roar. Poplar Fruit jumped to the window and looked in. He found that his daughter was gradually retreating with the chair, and gradually disappeared into the endless darkness. No! Poplar Fruit suddenly shouted and struggled to get up from the bed. Fong Bebe, who heard the sound outside, quickly opened the door and walked in. She was also very tired. Sitting outside, she almost fell asleep. But she was worried about Poplar Fruit's physical and mental state. She didn't dare to sleep. How is it? Fong Bebe was worried and gently patted Poplar Fruit's back. His back was wet with cold sweat. She handed the hot water that she had poured before to Poplar Fruit and said with heartache, "Don't ruin your body. Kiki is blessed by the heavens. She will be fine." Poplar Fruit took a big gulp and handed the cup to Fong Bebe. He looked at her gratefully and said softly, "I know. I just dreamed of Kiki, so my reaction was a bit big." After drinking the cup of hot water, a warm feeling flowed from his stomach to his whole body. Poplar Fruit could finally draw a clear line between illusion and reality. Fong Bebe put the cup aside, then opened her arms and hugged Poplar Fruit's waist from the side. Poplar Fruit also opened his big hands and hugged Fong Bebe in his arms. He let her beautiful face gently stick to his chest. "I know that you are very worried about Kiki. But no matter what decision you make, I will support you 100%. Fong Bebe said, and her voice was a bit choked. "But if anything happens to you, I will go with you." Originally, Fong Bebe's spirit had been tense for almost the whole day. She had always been very strong, but at this time, when it came to the depths of love, her emotions began to lose control. Pisces girls were the most insecure, and they were the easiest to let their imagination run wild. Fong Bebe had been a lot better in recent years, but she was still deeply dependent on Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit sighed and rubbed Fong Bebe's head. He said with heartache, "Silly, what nonsense are you talking about? We will be fine." Fong Bebe obediently murmured. Poplar Fruit knew Fong Bebe's current state. He gently patted Fong Bebe's back and said, "Go to sleep first. Don't talk about me. Don't ruin your own body." "What about you?" Fong Bebe asked softly. "I have slept for 4 hours." For the first time ever, Yanghua slept for an extra hour. He said, "I've already revived with full health and mana." Poplar Fruit even made a small joke. Although it was not funny at all, it could more or less make Fong Bebe feel at ease. She was too worried about Poplar Fruit's mental state. "I will go out and have a look. Hopefully, there will be new progress." Poplar Fruit covered Fong Bebe with a quilt and considerately tucked in the corner of the quilt. To the enemy, Poplar Fruit was ruthless. To his wife, Poplar Fruit would only be gentle. "I will watch you go out before I sleep." Fong Bebe curled up in the quilt full of Poplar Fruit's body temperature. She obediently nodded and said a little coquettishly. Poplar Fruit smiled, stood up, and walked out. On the way, he turned off the light. It was actually just a dream. Standing at the door, Poplar Fruit showed his powerlessness and decadence on his face. He clenched his fist and faintly sighed. "Daughter, where are you?" Chapter 1361. It was already late at night, but there was still no news. Yan Wanxiong only gave a new update: the border patrols had been strengthened. However, it didn't work. Poplar Fruit didn't know about the public opinion online, nor did he want to read it. People came and went in the command center. Poplar Fruit walked into the meeting room where Big Brother He and the others were resting. Meng Sanhua was lying on the table with his legs crossed and a jacket covering his body. The three of them were taking turns to rest. He Wenjue and Yang Jingdong were sitting on the side energetically. It seemed that they had already slept. Seeing Meng Sanhua sleeping, Poplar Fruit wasn't worried. He pulled a chair over and sat down. When these soldiers were sleeping, as long as she didn't yell in their ears, they would be able to sleep peacefully. He Wenjue glanced at Poplar Fruit and said calmly, "Don't worry." Even though Poplar Fruit was expressionless, the worry and anxiety in his eyes were as thick as espressos. Poplar Fruit nodded slightly. He didn't say anything and just looked at He Wenjue and Yang Jingdong. The two of them also had nothing to do. One was dismantling and reassembling a weapon, while the other was practicing his fighting techniques with a dagger. He Wenjue reassembled the gun and handed it to Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit realized that the gun was still his. "You've been hiding it for too long. There's some dust on the barrel. Let me wipe it for you." He Wenjue loved guns as much as his life. He was different from Poplar Fruit, who was just a gun enthusiast. Even though the dust didn't affect the use of the gun, he just didn't like it. He was like a Virgo with OCD in this aspect. Poplar Fruit picked up the gun, removed the clip, and pulled the bolt. He knew that the gun was fine, but he still shook his head and said to He Wenjue, "Bro, do you have any more clips?" Fong Bebe had brought the gun, but she only brought one full clip. It wasn't enough. "You don't need so many bullets in a frontal attack, right?" Yang Jingdong smiled. "Don't worry, I'll cover you with the sniper." "I still need it," Poplar Fruit insisted. He Wenjue shook his head. He took out 2 empty clips and a box of bullets from his backpack and handed them to Poplar Fruit. He Wenjue was careful. "A silencer, give me one too." Yang Guo looked at the bag behind He Wenjue, which was like an ammunition depot, and was very envious. He Wenjue rolled his eyes, turned around, and handed it to him. Since he was going to bring a weapon, Poplar Fruit had to prepare well. First, he changed into a refined combat uniform. It was also He Wenjue's. It was dark green and was very hidden in the forest. Of course, Poplar Fruit tore off the military and nationality symbols. The gun was tied to his left calf with a holster. It could be hidden by pulling down his trouser leg. The 2 clips were loaded and pinned to his waist. There was a small, delicate pocket there. Poplar Fruit didn't bring the rest of the bullets. He didn't need that many. In addition to the gun, Yang Guo also followed He Wenjue's request and stuffed a small GPS signal device in her shirt pocket. This way, He Wenjue and the others could use the GPS to determine Yang Guo's location. As for how to carry the 2 long miaodao, Poplar Fruit was still thinking about it. It was too conspicuous to carry on his back, but it couldn't fit in the money bag. It would look like a burden instead. Poplar Fruit was in a dilemma. Suddenly, a police officer rushed over and shouted, "Poplar Fruit, there's news." Behind him was Fong Bebe, who was still rubbing her eyes. It seemed that the police officer had woken her up. Suddenly, there was chaos. Poplar Fruit was the first to rush to the command center, followed by He Wenjue and the others. Jing Yujia, who had put on her clothes, hurried over. "What's the situation?" Poplar Fruit asked. Yan Wanxiong handed Poplar Fruit's phone to him. There was a short message on it. "Prepare the money. You have 2 hours to reach the following address. Only you are allowed to come. If there is a second person following, they will be held hostage." To be precise, it was a multimedia message, because the so-called address was actually a screenshot of a map. Poplar Fruit didn't know much about the geography of the area. He asked doubtfully, "Where is this?" Yan Wanxiong said with an ugly expression, "Myanmar, east 10 peaks of the Dajita Mountains." He opened a military map and pointed to the computer screen for Poplar Fruit to see. It was not far, really not far. It was actually 4 kilometers from the border. But these 4 kilometers, for Yan Wanxiong, were like heaven and earth. This meant that no matter how many police officers he had, no matter how many elite special police officers he had, they would not be able to cross the border to help Poplar Fruit. This kidnapper was really too cunning. Almost everyone had the same thought in their minds. It wasn't just the choice of location, but also the time. It was already late at night, and there were still 5 hours before the deadline that the kidnapper had mentioned. This meant that Poplar Fruit had to cross the border in the middle of the night, which also meant that there would be a lot of obstacles in the rescue operation. Not to mention Poplar Fruit, He Wenjue, and the other 2 definitely wouldn't be able to move freely in the middle of the night. And 2 hours, if they acted now, it might only be enough. If they still dilly-dallied, it would be completely impossible to reach the destination. Fortunately, the only good news was that the 2 million yuan had been prepared. Yan Wanxiong had also told the border guards that they would turn a blind eye and let Poplar Fruit cross the border. But everything had not been deployed yet. The special forces of the Shu-Du military region had not arrived yet. Should they discuss with the other party about the time? Impossible. Every time the other party sent a message, the SIM card would be taken off. There was no way to contact them. The other party was like Zhuge Liang, strategizing and controlling everything from the shadows. The police couldn't get any information at all. They could only be passive. What should they do? What should they do? Yan Wanxiong and Kai Yun were arguing with each other. But Poplar Fruit was very calm. On the contrary, he was a little happy, because he had enough of waiting without any news. The sooner the rescue operation started, the sooner Kiki could be rescued. "Don't say anything, I'll go first. Brother, you come half an hour later. Be careful not to get too close to me, in case we expose our whereabouts." Poplar Fruit said calmly, then he turned to look at Yan Wanxiong. "If they can catch up, please help them. If they can't, we'll take action first." He Wenjue nodded. Although the mission was very dangerous, he, Yang Jingdong, and Meng Sanhua were all dancing on the edge of a knife. No. They all have guns. It's too dangerous. Yan Wanxiong said excitedly, "Poplar Fruit, this is not the time to show off. No matter how good your kung fu is, you can't avoid being shot, you know. It's too late." Poplar Fruit pressed on Yan Wanxiong's shoulder and said softly. Yan Wanxiong paused for a moment and let out a depressed sigh. Chapter 1362. Poplar Fruit quickly packed his luggage, 2 large suitcases stuffed with 2 million in cash and a duffel bag, including 2 miaodao that were tied diagonally to the top of the suitcases. From afar, it was impossible to see any flaws. Downstairs, he stuffed the suitcases into the back of the police jeep. Not only the two girls, Fang Beibei and Zheng Yujie, but also Yan Wanxiong and the other police officers stood behind Poplar Fruit with heavy expressions. It was as if Poplar Fruit was about to embark on a path of no return. Going alone into a bandit's nest that might have dozens of gunmen, what would the result be? Even if he knew that Poplar Fruit was superhuman, and that he Wenjue and the others were battle-hardened, Yan Wanxiong still felt that it was a hopeless situation. But Poplar Fruit insisted on going. As a father, Yan Wanxiong understood Poplar Fruit's feelings very well. If it were him, he would also risk his life to save his daughter. So Yan Wanxiong's feelings were very complicated. But Poplar Fruit didn't mean to take care of his thoughts. He hugged Fang Beibei and comforted her. Fang Beibei shed tears, but she didn't dare to cry out loud, afraid that it would affect Poplar Fruit's mood. Patting Fang Beibei's shoulder, Poplar Fruit forced a smile and said, "Why are you crying? It's not like I'm not coming back." As soon as these words came out, Zheng Yujie, who was at the back, could no longer be strong. She also covered her mouth, and 2 lines of clear tears poured down. Fang Beibei was even more unable to control her emotions. 2 girls. One was his wife, and the other, including He Wenjue, looked at them with a strange expression. It was a kind of dilemma that they wanted to ask but couldn't. Poplar Fruit looked at the 2 girls and didn't feel good. He clenched his teeth and hugged Zheng Yujie into his arms. He didn't hug them all, but his long arms still gave Zheng Yujie support to wipe her tears. Although there was a suspicion of hugging left and right, Poplar Fruit swore that his thoughts were really pure. He couldn't let his feelings go on. It had been 15 minutes since he received the message. Poplar Fruit had to hurry up and get on the road. Poplar Fruit hugged the 2 girls' shoulders tightly. His tone returned to calm, and he said firmly, "Okay. Trust me, I'll bring Kiki and me back safely." He Wenjue finally held the car door and reminded Poplar Fruit, "Be careful, don't be rash." Poplar Fruit was very strong, stronger than many ordinary Special Forces soldiers, but the other party had Kiki as a hostage. He Wenjue was worried that Poplar Fruit would act irrationally. Poplar Fruit nodded, and finally looked back at them deeply. He waved his hand and turned to get into the car. The jeep was a little shaky on the mountain road, and no one spoke the whole way. Poplar Fruit pressed one hand on his Miaodao scabbard, and his eyes were slightly closed. The closer they were to danger, the colder Poplar Fruit felt his boiling blood become. He might be a natural warrior, but this time, he was here to save people and take revenge. Soon, they arrived at the border. A team of border guards walked over from the sentry post. They looked at Poplar Fruit, who got out of the car, and waved their hands to let him go with them. However, they kept a straight face and didn't say anything, as if nothing had happened. It was Poplar Fruit's first time crossing the border without a visa, but he didn't have time to record his feelings. He carried the backpack diagonally and dragged the 2 suitcases. He buried his head and walked into the vast world shrouded in darkness. In the summer night, there was a bit of fog in the hot and humid mountain forest. Poplar Fruit soon felt that his clothes were sticky, but his footsteps were firm, and he walked in the direction and route in his memory. It was quiet all around, and no one was following him. Poplar Fruit knew that he was the only one who could continue on this path. It was a little inconvenient to drag the suitcases through the mountain forest. From time to time, rocks or tree roots would bump it up, and the suitcases stuffed with 100 yuan would often twist and overturn on the ground. Too slow. Poplar Fruit frowned. This speed was only a little faster than normal walking. Instead of dragging it, it would be better. Poplar Fruit exerted force on his wrist and lifted the 2 suitcases with his hands. It was like a monk in a novel using a wooden bucket to carry water. Using both hands, he walked as if he was flying. Only Poplar Fruit had the strength and stamina to lift and carry something that weighed more than 15 kilograms, and then run for nearly 2 kilometers in a spurt of energy. About half of the journey, Poplar Fruit took a break to catch his breath. At the same time, he took out the police GPS provided by Yen Wanxiong to confirm his position to ensure that he didn't go the wrong way. Although his memory and sense of direction weren't bad, walking in the pitch-black forest, Yang Guo didn't dare to guarantee that he wouldn't go astray as he walked. Speaking of which, Poplar Fruit's night vision wasn't bad. Although it wasn't as good as night vision goggles, it was still much better than ordinary people. This was because his eyes could see very clearly through the weak moonlight at night. The forest was indeed pitch black, but for Poplar Fruit, it was like walking in a dark alley. He could still see the ground clearly. Indeed, he didn't walk to the 2-kilometer mark, but it wasn't because he was going in the wrong direction. Poplar Fruit thought for a moment and suddenly realized. The distance marked on the map was that long, but in reality, there was still a big deviation. Just like how you had to turn when there was a tree in front of you, Poplar Fruit would also try to walk around a small hill in front of him. So, after walking around and around, the distance increased by a lot. In this way, Poplar Fruit had to speed up. Otherwise, if he couldn't get to the designated place on time, Poplar Fruit couldn't imagine the consequences. In this way, Poplar Fruit walked in the forest in the dark, as if he didn't care about the foreign land under his feet. He also didn't care if he would encounter wild beasts or even bandits lying in ambush on the side of the road, waiting to catch him, a turtle in a jar. Of course, Poplar Fruit still maintained vigilance. Although he didn't care, he still paid attention to his surroundings with his senses. He didn't have time to look left and right. Arrived. Poplar Fruit spent more than half an hour to walk the remaining 4 kilometers. This was much slower than a marathon, but it couldn't be helped. Who asked Poplar Fruit to carry 2 heavy boxes of money? This was already a very amazing result. Arriving at the designated place 20 minutes early, Poplar Fruit frowned and looked around vigilantly. Then, he carefully walked towards the so-called landmark building, a small wooden house built in the mountains. It was so simple that it couldn't even be compared to the small rain shed in the orchard. But there was nothing inside, not even a person. Did I go the wrong way? Chapter 1363. On this day, Xiao Luoka was very anxious. He was listless in class. After class, he had been squatting in front of the computer, refreshing Weibo and the news over and over again. He couldn't eat or sleep well if he didn't see any good news. Many girls who had a crush on him saw their Prince Charming so haggard, and their hearts were broken. Xiao Luoka was a strange name because he gave it to himself. He was an international student from Canada. He was a Chinese and Canadian hybrid, which made him the most popular boy in Shuimu University. But in fact, Xiao Luoka rarely attended parties for international students. He was a traditional boy. In other words, he was a shy otaku. Because of Chinese culture, he came to China to study. Now, not only could he speak fluent and slightly accented Mandarin, but he also liked to read Chinese online novels and variety shows. Recently, Xiao Luoka liked a newly broadcast parent-child variety show, especially My Daughter's Guest, Kiki. Not to mention how beautiful this girl was, her kindness, naivety, and cuteness when she interacted with her father made Xiao Luoka very fond of her. Xiao Luo had analyzed just what level of affection he had for Chi-Chi was at. The little girl was very beautiful, there was no doubt about that, but she was too young to make Xiao Luoka have that kind of pink adoration. If it wasn't the attraction between men and women, then his love for Kiki should be similar to the love of a big brother to a little sister. Or, he should also be overflowing with fatherly love. She was good-looking, and every frown and smile made the dim dormitory bright, making everyone who saw her want to hold her in their arms and love her. Wearing a princess dress, she was as exquisite as a real princess. Even if she changed into ordinary clothes, it couldn't hide her delicate and beautiful appearance. Her personality was also very likable. Other than dreaming of being a princess, the little girl didn't seem to have too many ambitious goals. She was usually gentle and kind. She wouldn't argue with others, nor would she play any tricks. On the contrary, she could actively take responsibility and help her friends complete their tasks. Not only was there no competition, Kiki was also her father's warm baby. When she was playing games, she was worried about her father, and the tears that fell down her face made people feel distressed and warm in their hearts. Of course, Kiki was definitely not a fragile and crybaby girl like Lin Dayu. Seeing her carrying a heavy basket and running like the wind, almost everyone in the audience couldn't help but laugh from the bottom of their hearts. Also, the little girl was very smart. She remembered everything her father said. Sometimes, the little stories she made up could make you laugh the whole day. That's right, when the little girl first appeared, everyone thought that she was a quiet little lady. But later, they realized that she could also be playful and cute. Big Yang, Little Yang, Little Yang, the little girl did not make her father dizzy, but the audience was attracted by her cuteness. Who wouldn't want such a beautiful, good-natured, smart, and cute little girl as their daughter? Xia Luo, who was not married yet, had never considered the problem of his marriage. However, where did his father go in 2 phases? He realized that he wanted to get married. To be exact, she wanted to have a daughter as cute as Kiki. This wish could not be turned into reality, because to get married, he had to find a girlfriend who was willing to marry him. Now, Charlotte did not have a girlfriend. However, he, who liked to read online novels, also liked to fantasize about himself being reborn into the past, then find a girlfriend he liked and have a super beautiful and cute daughter. Well, after watching this season's show, he would write a novel like this online. The protagonist was also a Canadian. The main plot was to go to Taiwan to start a variety show and eventually become an entertainment tycoon. Of course, he had to marry a very beautiful Chinese girl and have a super beautiful little princess. Finally, he came to the mainland to plan a parent-child show called, Where Are We Going, Dad? And bring his daughter to participate as a guest. Xia Luo had already thought of the name of the novel. It would be called My Princess. The protagonist's surname was also Xia, and his name was Xia Kelly. It was very similar to the pronunciation of chocolate. He was a very gentle and sweet man. His daughter's name was Xia Tian, because she met you this summer, liked you, and wanted to protect you. Just thinking about it made him happy. However, in the morning, he saw the news that suddenly broke out on the internet. During the recording of the show, Kiki was kidnapped. At first, Xia Luo thought that it was fake news, but his last bit of hope was shattered by the kidnapping video that went viral on the internet. Sometimes, fantasies brought about very real feelings. Although he was just an ordinary audience member and only began to pay attention to and like this little girl this month, Kiki's misfortune seemed to be his daughter's misfortune. All of Xia Luo's good mood disappeared. All that was left was his concern, worry, and anxiety for Kiki. For the whole day, Xia Luo didn't eat or drink. He only browsed the computer with all kinds of security experts' guesses. He didn't see the police or Poplar Fruit come forward to say anything about the latest developments. Why didn't anyone tell everyone what the situation was? Even if you were short of money, Poplar Fruit just had to shout on Weibo, and our fans would pay for Kiki's redemption. It had to be said that many fans were as cute as Xia Luo. However, a day passed without any progress. When he went to bed at night, Xia Luo couldn't sleep. He browsed the news over and over again, even if it was boring and unconfirmed news. He still couldn't sleep until 3:00 in the morning. Xia Luo was disappointed. At this moment, Poplar Fruit was dragging dozens of kilograms of cash and rushing through the mountains outside the southwest border. How could he have the time to take out his mobile phone and post on Weibo? Even if it was the Public Security Department's news briefing on Cyan's side, they wouldn't reveal the slightest bit of secrets at this critical juncture of the case. What if the bandits were also watching? Of course, Xia Luo was quite extreme after all. Many people ate what they should and slept what they should. However, Kiki's uncertain life and death really affected the hearts of millions of fans. They also called out in their hearts, "Come back. Kiki, you must be strong and wait for the police uncle to bring you back." As if feeling the power of this belief, Poplar Fruit gritted his teeth and ran madly through the mountains and forests. He was already very tired. There was no other way. Carrying dozens of kilograms of things, he had already run more than 10 kilometers continuously. He ran from night to day, and gradually there was a green and white halo. The hateful bandits seemed to be playing with him. Every time he arrived at a location, there would be a new text message in less than 15 minutes, prompting him to run to the next location. The intention was obvious. They wanted to exhaust Poplar Fruit's physical strength. At the same time, they inadvertently disrupted the deployment between Poplar Fruit and Hiwenjua. Hiwenjua and the other two would always come up empty every time they didn't know where the final location was. This was very likely to be discovered by the other party. Poplar Fruit had already informed Big Brother he not to act rashly. He would wait until he confirmed the location before informing them of the operation. Chapter 1364. Nab was one of the confidants of the boss, the smoking addict. He was a Burmese, and he was the only one who was qualified to be a sub-boss in this team with more Chinese people. The reason was simple. He was saved by the smoking addict from the mine, and he even took a bullet for the smoking addict. He swore that he would only be the smoking addict's lackey and had no greater ambitions. It was because of his loyalty that the smoking addict sent him out. He ran around the few contact points to keep an eye on the rich guy called Fruit. The smoking addict told his subordinates that only Nab was trustworthy. The other people he sent out might kill Poplar Fruit and run away with the 2 million. Then, they could forget about getting the 100 million. Therefore, the naive Nab felt that he had a great responsibility, and he spent the entire night messing with Poplar Fruit. Of course, he was happy, because through his binoculars, he could see that the idiot egg in every contact point was being played by him. It was like a cat playing with a mouse. Of course, it was not that the other party did not react at all. At the first contact point, he hid on a small hill nearby and observed Poplar Fruit through his binoculars. He noticed that the person suddenly turned his head and looked in his direction. At that moment, he felt like a thief who was suddenly forced into a corner by the headlights of several police cars. He almost pissed his pants and wanted to run away, but fortunately, Poplar Fruit quickly turned his head. He breathed a sigh of relief. That's right. How could he be discovered so easily? He must have made a blind guess. After that, he secretly observed Poplar Fruit a few times, but Nab did not notice him. Therefore, Nab was relieved. Every time, he would wait for Poplar Fruit to leave for a long time. When he saw that there was no one following him, he would jump down the hill and ride his bicycle to the next location. Nab hummed a weird Chinese song as he arrived at the observation point that he had already set up. He was loyal to the Chinese boss, and he knew that if he wanted to be a good lackey, he had to learn how to communicate with the boss. What is the most important element of communication? It wasn't sincerity, nor was it flattery. It was because they shared the same language. Although the team leader had learned Burmese, he couldn't speak it well. As an outstanding lackey, he should learn Chinese well and not make things difficult for the team leader. Only then would the team leader put him in an important position. As for the Chinese song, Nab had learned it from the 5 Great Wolves. The small leader called 5 Big Wolves was also the confidant of the big leader. Nai Bo asked him how he could speak Chinese well. 5 Big Wolves told him that if he wanted to learn Chinese well, he had to know how to sing this singer called Zhou Gongju. This was the easiest song to learn. Alright, I've gone a little too far. Nai Bo threw down his bicycle and ran up the mountain peak that wasn't too high. It was also a good place to observe from a distance. Nai Bo took out a pair of old binoculars from his sling bag and glanced over. Sure enough, that rich guy named Guo was already there. Although he had a bicycle and was familiar with the roads, Poplar Fruit always arrived before him. Nai Bo didn't even need to guess. Of course, other factors aside, Naibo still admired poplar fruit. After running for half the night, he was still able to run so fast. It was too amazing. The sky was just starting to brighten. There was no light, but Naibo could see clearly behind the tree. The black figure was motionless. He was probably tired, right? Even an Iron Man wouldn't be able to withstand such torment. Naibo gritted his teeth. I don't know how many more trips I have to make. Don't make me ride the bicycle to fetch him when he collapses. That would be a pain in the ass. Naibo muttered in Burmese. He took out his phone. It was the classic 1050 model from Nordic Walnut Smashing. In China, it could only be used as a spare phone for a spare phone. No one would want it even if it was given to them. Even in the increasingly prosperous stronghold, everyone had upgraded their guns to cannons. Even the small fries were using smartphones. But in Naibo's hands, the 1050 was still like a treasure. Because it was given to him by the team leader 3 years ago. It was a symbol of trust and glory. No matter what, the 1050 could still be used to make a call. Naibo realized that there were still 5 minutes to the agreed time. He didn't wait any longer. He followed the agreement and sent a confirmation message back to the stronghold. This way, the stronghold would know that Fruit was still under their control. Then, Fruit would receive a new message and continue to run to the next location. Naibo had played with this process for a few hours and 5 or 6 times. He had already gotten the hang of it. He grinned and stared at the black figure in the distance through his binoculars. He muttered excitedly, 10, 9, 8. He was still counting down in Chinese, although his pronunciation was weird. Naibo was very accurate the last time. When the countdown reached 1, the black figure would move and take out his phone to see the message sent to him by the stronghold. He was like Zhuge Liang, who could foresee things like a god. 2, 1. Naibo was depressed. Why wasn't the black figure moving this time? Could it be that the 5 great wolves were slacking off and teasing him? Are you waiting for this? Suddenly, a voice in Burmese came from behind. Scaring people would scare people to death. Naibo was shocked. At that moment, his hair stood on end and his scalp went numb. He subconsciously turned his head and saw a man standing behind him, looking at him coldly. However, his left hand was raised in front of him, and there was a bright phone in his hand. However, Naibo's attention was not on it at all. His pupils dilated instantly. He recognized the man who had appeared behind him without him knowing. It was actually Fruit. Wait a minute, wasn't he behind that tree? Could he teleport? Could he be a clone? How was that possible? How could he appear behind him without a sound? Was he a ghost? At that moment, thousands of thoughts flashed through Naibo's mind. It was impossible to sort them out. He could only twist them together. It was a mess. It was a mess. He could only cut the Gordian knot. Naibo subconsciously reached for the gun on his belt. As long as he had the gun, everything would be under his control. Naibo didn't even consider if he would shoot Fruit. However, the quick knife wasn't his. Naibo suddenly felt his vision blur. His vision was a little slippery, as if he was sitting on a skateboard. Then, he fell into endless darkness. Plop. A body fell heavily to the ground. The head and the body seemed to have separated. Scarlet blood immediately dyed the ground red. The sky was still green, and there wasn't a trace of sunlight. However, the dark green shrubs and weeds were already covered with blood-red dewdrops that wouldn't disappear even if the sun rose. This was just the beginning. Chapter 1365. Poplar Fruit didn't even look at Nab, who had fallen to the ground. His face was as calm as still water. He was so calm that he reminded people of those cold-blooded poisonous snakes. He lowered his head and glanced at the Miaodo that he had pulled out at an unknown time and pointed diagonally at the ground. The surface of the Miaodo was as bright as a mirror. Only the sharp edge of the blade was stained with a trace of barely visible blood. Poplar Fruit's blade was too fast. Even Nab, who was still showing off just a moment ago, couldn't clearly see what had separated his head from his body. After starting the massacre, Poplar Fruit didn't have any emotional fluctuations. He squatted down and picked up the Noji 1050 that couldn't be broken no matter how he dropped it. He flipped through the phone's message records to verify his previous thoughts. In fact, when Poplar Fruit was at the first location, he had already noticed Nab spying. His mysterious premonition had come into play again. However, after he took a glance, he still maintained his calm and collected state. After that, Poplar Fruit followed the other party's instructions and kept running. He ran to 6 or 7 locations, and only now did he make his move. During this process, Nab didn't know that the seemingly stupid Poplar Fruit had already locked onto his position. Through comparison, Nab had figured out the pattern of his choice of observation points and the interval between when he started spying. Therefore, this time, after Poplar Fruit arrived, he first observed the appearance of the surrounding forest. Then, without stopping, he immediately took off his jacket and used the lever of the trolley box and the cover of the forest to create the appearance of a dummy. Even though it was dawn, looking from afar, it was impossible to tell if it was a real person or a dummy. Poplar Fruit was also betting on his own judgment. The other party wouldn't arrive so early, and wouldn't realize that he had swapped the crown prince with a raccoon. He didn't hesitate at all to throw 2 million in cash on the spot. Holding his Miaodo, he groped his way up to the observation point that he guessed the other party would choose, and then hid in a big tree. Fortunately, Poplar Fruit's judgment was completely correct. The other party rode a bicycle and appeared in his field of vision. Then, without any warning, he made him stand behind and watch him for a long time. Of course, this had a lot to do with Poplar Fruit's ability to restrain his aura. Poplar Fruit watched all of Nabu's actions and understood the entire process of Nabu contacting the criminals. In this way, he didn't have to be led by the nose by the other party, and he didn't have to play hide and seek with Nabu anymore. Nabu no longer had any value. Of course, Poplar Fruit originally wanted to interrogate Nabu, but it seemed that the other party didn't cooperate and directly took out his gun. How could Poplar Fruit tolerate this? He took advantage of the hatred that had been suppressed for a long time. Like Shimen Shueishua, he brazenly pulled out his knife. Although he didn't have the Night of the Moon or the summit of the Forbidden City, his knife was like lightning, and he broke through the ghost door. Comparing the information in Nabu's phone and his own information, Poplar Fruit found that the phone number that Nabu contacted was different from the one displayed on his phone. Moreover, it was more like a foreign number. Perhaps, there was a mystery here. Poplar Fruit immediately informed He Wenjua and Yan Wanxiong in China, asking them to investigate and track this phone number. As for himself, Poplar Fruit put away the 2 phones and sighed softly. Although he killed the other party's surveillance, Kiki's whereabouts were still unknown. He still had to continue to follow the other party's instructions. When he reached the vicinity of the next location, he would pretend to be the surveillance person and send a text message to the criminals, hoping to end this torment early and find his daughter. Poplar Fruit wasn't afraid of getting dirty. He searched Nabu's body and didn't find any other meaningful clues. He only took his telescope that had a broken lens, and one of the lenses could still be used for reconnaissance. He didn't take the gun. Poplar Fruit didn't care about that broken pistol. Shaking his head, Poplar Fruit stood up. Originally, he wanted to look at the place where he had just replaced the flower with the tree, but Poplar Fruit was suddenly stunned. Although the hillside wasn't high, only about a few dozen meters, looking down from a height was completely different from staying at the foot of the hill and looking left and right. He didn't feel that he was very tall, but he felt that he was very familiar. Why did he feel that he was very familiar? This was Myanmar, a country that Poplar Fruit had never been to before. Did he pass by this place when he was on his way? Impossible. Although the other party had directed him to go around in circles in this vast forest, there wasn't a single path that was repeated or intersected. Wait. This angle, this view. Suddenly, Poplar Fruit's scalp went numb. With his excellent memory, he finally remembered where he had seen this scene before. Wasn't this what he had seen in the nightmare a few hours ago? No, it wasn't the valley where the factory had landed, but a mountain peak and forest that he had seen when he was flying through the air unconsciously. God! Poplar Fruit's breathing was heavy. He compared the two scenes again and again. It was like he was playing a game of finding fault. He compared the scene before him and the scene in his memory. The layout of the trees and the height of the mountain peak were exactly the same. How was this possible? What was going on? Poplar Fruit couldn't believe his eyes and judgment. Wait a minute. Yang Guo forcefully closed his eyes. He was forcing himself to calm down. He was forcing himself to remove some of the chaotic rational thoughts and temporarily replace them with a more serious emotional thought process. Right, Kiki. Poplar Fruit suddenly opened his eyes. What dream, memory, and terrifying coincidence. Why did he care so much? If his previous dream was a miraculous reflection of reality, then it meant that Chi-Chi was locked up in the same room of the factory he dreamed of last night. In the dream, he couldn't break the door or window to bring his daughter back, but in reality, such a setting didn't exist. Yes, if Kiki was really in that factory, he didn't need to continue being led by the nose by the other party. He could be one step ahead of the other party and sneak in first to save Kiki. But the problem was Kiki really in that factory? What if his judgment was wrong? What if this terrifying coincidence was just a coincidence? Following the other party's instructions or following his own dream was a very difficult choice. Poplar Fruit closed his eyes and breathed heavily. He couldn't drag this out any longer. He had to make a decision. At 4:20 in the morning, the sky was already turning white, and there were signs of dawn in the gray sky. A cool breeze blew through the forest, causing the leaves to rustle. However, it was somber and quiet. Only the red soil that had already spread out on the ground carried a trace of the unpleasant smell of blood. Swoosh! Poplar Fruit sheathed his sword. His eyes became firm. Clearly, he had switched to a rational way of thinking. He had made his choice. Chapter 1366. Swoosh. 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 The sound from afar made a weasel that had just poked its head out of a crack shrink back. The sound of leaves breaking was not loud. The humidity in the tropical rainforest was very high at this time. Even thick shoes felt wet and a little heavy, as if they had not been completely dried after being washed. Poplar Fruit did not care. He pulled the 2 boxes of money and rolled over them. Along the way, he chose to walk in the more hidden woods, avoiding the valleys and paths that were easy to be discovered. Fortunately, he did not meet anyone. He only saw a Burmese python from afar. This one was much bigger than the one Zhou Shimin had seen. Its body was as thick as a bucket, and it was enough to swallow an adult like Poplar Fruit in one bite. Of course, because of Poplar Fruit's vigilance and the distance between them, they passed by peacefully. They had been walking for about an hour. During this time, Poplar Fruit had used the seized Noji 1050 to send a message to the bandits in exchange for the same location. Poplar Fruit gradually understood why the bandits were doing this. They wanted to exhaust Poplar Fruit so that he could not display his terrifying skills. Of course, Poplar Fruit did not follow their instructions. In his mind, he used the memory of the previous dream to construct a rough route, correcting it as he walked. But the deeper he went, the more frightened Poplar Fruit was. It was exactly the same as the forest in the dream. If he continued walking like this, in less than 15 minutes, he would be able to come into contact with the factory where Kiki was imprisoned in the dream. Of course, Poplar Fruit also believed in his premonition more and more. It was too magical, too mysterious, and could not be explained. Then, he did not need to think about it. He just needed to follow the directions of his premonition. There was still 1 kilometer to go. Poplar Fruit found that there were more and more traces of human footsteps in front of him. He even saw traces of wheels. Slowing down and hiding the 2 boxes of cash, Poplar Fruit quietly crept up a small hill and crawled his head out. Poplar Fruit immediately burst into tears. There was actually a dilapidated factory in the small valley in front of him. The layout of the factory was exactly the same as the one in Poplar Fruit's dream. The factory had been closed for a long time, but Poplar Fruit guessed that since it could be built in such a remote place, it should be an arsenal of the early Burmese warlords, and then it was occupied by these guys as their headquarters. But who cares what it used to be? Poplar Fruit only knew that Kiki must be here. That's right, it must be here. Poplar Fruit was 100% sure that the Jade Emperor or Guanyin Bodhisattva had given him that dream. Somehow, they had given him a clear path to save his daughter. If everything goes well, I must personally take Kiki to the temple and burn incense for the Buddha. Oh, and the Taoist temple. Poplar Fruit thought in confusion. No, I can't be too excited, I have to calm down. Poplar Fruit's eyes became cold again. He had to maintain a high level of calmness in order to save his daughter safely. Of course, before that, Poplar Fruit took a few photos and sent them to Wenjua with his mobile phone. Because it was a cross-border, they couldn't track the number that Poplar Fruit had given them. Big Brother He and the others were his only 3 reinforcements, and he needed their help. Okay, I'll be there soon. It will take an hour. Wenjua sent a message. He had Poplar Fruit's location, so he could quickly find Poplar Fruit. Don't act alone. Oh right, we have more reinforcements, but they will be slower. It will take an hour and a half. Wenjua's reinforcements should be the special forces from Shu-Du military region. However, Poplar Fruit frowned. He looked closely at the 1 hour that Big Brother He had mentioned. It was already past 5:00. In another hour, it would be past 6:00, almost 7:00. What about half an hour later? If 5:00 was considered the time when people wanted to sleep in, then 6:00, or even 7:00, Poplar Fruit believed that these bandits, who were often active in the mountains, wouldn't be sleeping like the night owls in the city. Most of them must have woken up. No, I can't wait like this. Poplar Fruit knew his daughter's location. He even knew the factory very well. He had checked it inside and out yesterday. He had to rush to his daughter's side before the bandits woke up. Even if they couldn't break through the encirclement, Kiki wouldn't be in danger with his protection. Then, he would delay until Big Brother He and the others arrived. With a pincer attack, he would be able to eliminate all the bandits in the most effective way. Of course, regardless of whether they were eliminated or not, safely rescuing Kiki was the first priority. After making up his mind, Poplar Fruit sent another text message to the other party. Then, he received a text message about the new location of the fake handover. Poplar Fruit suddenly had a feeling that this might be the last time he was tormenting him. There wasn't much time left for him. Poplar Fruit had to act immediately. He couldn't care less about Big Brother He's text message. Poplar Fruit returned to the place where he hid the money box. He took off the 2 miaodao and crossed the scabbards on his back. Of course, Poplar Fruit only took out one of the miaodao, and the other was still in the scabbard. He didn't wrap a piece of cloth around his hand and tie his hand to the knife like in the movies. There was no need for that. What Poplar Fruit needed was flexibility. He also took out the pistol from his calf, put on the silencer, loaded the gun, and held it in his right hand. A knife in his left hand and a pistol in his right. This wasn't a good combination, but Poplar Fruit was good at using knives with both hands. His left hand wasn't as good at using a gun as his right hand, so he could only hold it like this. He put both phones on silent and turned off vibration mode before he put them in his jacket pocket. Poplar Fruit had to make sure nothing went wrong. Poplar Fruit hid the 2 suitcases containing the money and a duffel bag among a pile of boulders next to the factory wall. He had made a small backup plan here, just in case. Surprisingly, although it was already half dawn and most people were still asleep, there were still some of these dangerous criminals patrolling the high towers and rooftops with guns. Of course, there weren't many of them, only about 5 or 6. After a night of peace, these people let down their guard. Some were dozing off, some were chatting in relief, and some were even playing games on their phones. Poplar Fruit easily bypassed these guards. He didn't intend to touch them, because these guards were in the open. If they suddenly disappeared, it would easily expose Poplar Fruit's invasion plan. Poplar Fruit had even made up his mind that unless it was absolutely necessary, Poplar Fruit wouldn't easily make a move. Everything was to sneak to Kiki's side, protect her, and even secretly rescue her. These criminals probably didn't expect that someone would know the structure of their base better than they did. Furthermore, someone had quietly climbed over the wall right under their noses and snuck into the exhaust duct of the factory through a small door. Chapter 1367. There was one bad thing about a tropical rainforest. Once the rainy season arrived, the humidity would be off the charts. In places with poor ventilation, don't even talk about washing clean clothes. Just casually wiping the walls would leave a watermark on one's hand. Hussein woke up very early today. It wasn't that he didn't want to sleep, but it was too uncomfortable to sleep. It was as if he was lying on a quilt that was fished out from the water. As he cursed, Hussein stretched his body. His skinny body did not even have any muscles, let alone abdominal muscles. It made people feel terrified just by looking at him. He swaggered out with his gun and prepared to go outside to bask in the sun. Wait until I get a large sum of money from that rich man, then I can get 1,800,000 to buy a house in the city and buy 2 women. I don't have to stay in this corner anymore. Damn it, if I stay here, I'll be tortured to death. With such a happy thought, not only Hussein, but everyone in the team was fantasizing about getting enough money from Poplar Fruit for a lifetime. Even if each person got 1 million, in Myanmar, 1 million was enough to make them a millionaire. Then why would they still want to risk their lives here? That girl is really pretty. Hussein thought enviously, but unfortunately, she's too young. She's pretty but useless. When I get money in the future, I'll buy a mother and a daughter. I'll raise the younger one and continue to be my wife. He smiled evilly as he used his little finger to dig his nose. He carried his rifle like he was carrying a hoe. It was as if he was really carrying a hoe and going around to dig up the walls of those good people's homes. Pack, 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 pack. The footsteps of Hussein's slippers became clearer and clearer in the long corridor. Poplar Fruit frowned. He was hiding in a dent in the metal door of the corridor. He was trying his best to suck in his lower abdomen and stick his whole body to the metal door. This was the only way to ensure that he wouldn't be seen. In the end, he was still inexperienced. If it was a special forces soldier like Big Brother he who sneaked in, they would definitely be able to quietly hide all of these motley crew in their beds. Unlike him, who had just come out of the vent and almost bumped into a guy who had just come out of a room. You said you were at 5:00. Why didn't you sleep? Why did you come out for a walk? Poplar Fruit was a little depressed. But from the looks of it, the other party was getting closer and closer, and he had nowhere to hide. A close combat with the other party was unavoidable. He wasn't afraid of Poplar Fruit, but he needed to consider whether to use a knife or a gun. The miaow was too long, and it was not easy to use in a small space. The gun had its drawbacks as well. Although it was equipped with a silencer, if the bullet passed through and hit the wall, there would probably still be a sound. However, regardless of whether it was a knife or a spear, there was a drawback to using it in a place where people would definitely pass by. It was easy to leave behind bloodstains. Yang's mind spun like lightning, and he suddenly had an idea. The shirtless Husan swaggered past. He was very calm because the headquarters was very safe. As long as they didn't provoke the big boss, they could always live well. Suddenly, Husan felt a chill run down his spine. His slow brain finally managed to process the effect brought about by the corner of his eyes. A second ago, he had walked past a place, and there was a person coldly looking at him from the side. Alone? Before Husan had the time to think about what this meant, he had already experienced the consequences. An arm suddenly stretched out from the side. He subconsciously opened his mouth, but his mouth and nose were covered by another hand. Ugh! Husan's thoughts were already in a mess. Suddenly, he felt a huge force acting on his face. Following a caw-caw sound and a sharp pain, Husan saw his butt for the last time before he was swallowed by the darkness. What the hell? Poplar Fruit didn't care what Husan was thinking about. He still maintained his posture of supporting Husan, and with a hook of his long leg, he picked up the rifle that Husan had dropped. Only then did it not cause any abnormal noise. Phew! Poplar Fruit secretly took a breath. He was also very nervous. This assassination was different from dealing with Naboo. In the heart of the bandits, it was too difficult to deal with the enemy without making any noise. After taking back the knife that he had secretly placed beside him, Poplar Fruit dragged Husan back to his room and stuffed him under the blanket, pretending that he was sleeping soundly. He had to go to the 3rd floor. Poplar Fruit knew his daughter's location. He still had 2 more floors to go. It was very convenient to take the stairs, but the possibility of being exposed was very high. Poplar Fruit had already heard some people moving around. It seemed like he had to be even more careful. It was not impossible to be afraid of the outer walls, but Poplar Fruit didn't want to wait too long. He needed to use some of the hidden vertical stairs that he had explored in his dream to climb up. However, it wasn't really hidden. Although Poplar Fruit was very careful, when he climbed up to the 2nd floor, he saw a short man in his underwear walking out while yawning. He really met someone at the corner. Even Poplar Fruit was caught off guard. He opened his eyes wide, and his sharp gaze directly met the confused and frightened eyes of the other party. Without any time to think, Poplar Fruit raised the Miaodao in his left hand and rushed forward. The bright silver blade flashed, and the man also felt his vision blur. The blade had already pierced through his throat and came out from the back of his neck. It wasn't known if he could feel pain, but Poplar Fruit's movements were too fast. He simply didn't give the other party a chance to react, and directly pushed him back into the room. Gurgle. Gurgle. 2 weak sounds. He couldn't shout, because his throat had already been cut. With a tremble, the short man's head drooped, and he stopped breathing. But Poplar Fruit didn't have a chance to catch his breath. His scalp was somewhat numb, because although he had pushed the man back, Poplar Fruit discovered that he had practically jumped into a den of thieves. 1, 2, 3. Including the one he had already killed, there were actually 4 people living in this room. The other 3 were staring dumbfoundedly at their companion, who had just walked out, being pushed back with a knife in his back. Poplar Fruit's reaction was half a second faster than the other party's. When one of them trembled and reached for a gun hanging on the wall, Poplar Fruit's right hand swiped at his waist and a black pistol appeared in his hand. Pfft! A hole exploded in the head of the man who had reached for the gun, and he fell diagonally onto the bed. The other 2 were so frightened that they trembled and raised their hands. One of them hurriedly opened his mouth. Don't, but how could Poplar Fruit show mercy? He coldly raised his hand and fired 2 more shots. He didn't even need to aim, and just waved his arm in a willful manner. Similarly, 2 people fell backward. In the middle of their foreheads, 2 brand new bloody holes were dripping with dark red blood. Fortunately, it was a pistol with a silencer. Although there was still a bit of sound, it only stayed in this room and didn't spread out. Poplar Fruit's massacre here was a little merciless. Even he himself felt a little strange. It was true that he was calm, but the madness of hatred was sprouting in his heart. Saving Kiki was still the first priority, but the second priority had quietly changed to revenge. It's not enough. They haven't given enough. It's far from enough to make up for the shock and harm my daughter has suffered. Chapter 1368. He knew that this trip would not be smooth, but Poplar Fruit did not know that it would be so difficult. The distance from the outside through the exhaust passage was peaceful, but he immediately encountered a series of troubles. There was 1 on the first floor and 6 on the second floor. In addition to the 4 that he killed in the room at the beginning, there were 2 more that were standing at the connection between the second and third floors. Poplar Fruit had no choice but to attack again. Carefully reaching the third floor, Poplar Fruit almost exposed his whereabouts. At that time, when he wanted to avoid a guard with a gun, he did not expect that the guard would turn his head. Poplar Fruit had just turned around and was 10 meters away from the guard. Even if he could use the Shaoli flying dagger, he would not be able to kill the guard in an instant. Suddenly, Poplar Fruit was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He was ready to take out his gun and fight to the death with the guard. Fortunately, the guard seemed to have just taken some drugs, and his head was a little dizzy. When he saw Poplar Fruit swaying, he thought that he was one of them. Needless to say, after Yang Guo entered the exhaust tunnel, there was a lot of dust and cobwebs all over his body. His handsome face looked like it had been smeared with soot from the bottom of a pot. There were patches of black and white, and he looked like one of the lowest level minions in the team. The guard with the gun muttered and walked towards Poplar Fruit. Although he was speaking Burmese, and because he had taken drugs, his words were incoherent, but Poplar Fruit still understood what he was saying. I did not bring a lighter, lend me a cigarette. This greedy excuse and logic was good. Even if he knew that his mind was in a mess, Poplar Fruit was still a little speechless. Of course, he did not laugh at him. Instead, he put his left hand that was holding the knife behind his butt and pretended to take out a cigarette. Hey, you idiot! Who put a cigarette in your butt? I saw it, it's here. The greedy drug addict reached out his hand to touch Poplar Fruit's chest. Poplar Fruit's eyes suddenly emitted a sharp light. His right hand reached out like lightning and grabbed the drug addict's right hand, which was originally holding the gun and pulling the trigger. His left hand swung. Ugh! The drug addict suddenly died. He died on the edge of Poplar Fruit's knife. Because the miadao was not like a dagger, it could not be pulled out. It was too long, and Poplar Fruit could only cut the middle of the long knife. The drug addict's left hand weakly, and his head was still resting on Poplar Fruit's arm. The knife's blade cut deeply into his throat, and scarlet blood gradually flowed out of the knife. Yang Guo pushed him away in disgust. Of course, he still carefully placed the drug addict on the ground. Up until now, only half an hour had passed. Although Yang Guo had killed a lot along the way and played until his heart was pounding, overall, he felt that everything was going smoothly. After all, he had not been discovered. Moreover, 50 meters ahead, he would reach the place where Kiki was imprisoned. He would be able to take Kiki back soon. Unexpectedly, just as Poplar Fruit removed the drug addict's body to a dark corner, there was a sudden commotion downstairs. First, there was a shrill scream, and then the whole factory seemed to have been awakened from a deep sleep. Suddenly, many shirtless people with guns came out from every room and corner. Shit! Poplar Fruit's heart sank. The sound came from the second floor, which meant that the body he had left behind had been discovered. Of course, it also meant that his whereabouts had been exposed. What's with the noise? Suddenly, there was a loud shout from the third floor. The voice was not very loud, but it was very majestic, and it immediately suppressed the panic of many people. Yang Guo frowned. What he heard was actually Mandarin. Moreover, although the person's voice was a little hoarse early in the morning, Yang Guo's judgment was definitely correct. It was the bastard in the video. Team leader, Lu Zi, and his family are all dead. Fuck, which bastard did it? I'll skin him alive. A person on the second floor shouted in a hoarse voice. Hu-san on the first floor is also dead. Another person on the first floor shouted in awkward Mandarin, but he seemed to be a lot more panicked. There was no hatred in his voice, only fear of the unknown. Yang Guo frowned and hid in a corner. She gripped the hilt of her knife and gun tightly. They were so close. If he had 10 more minutes, he would definitely be able to rescue Kiki. But this was too much. He had been discovered. There was another way, which was for Poplar Fruit to suddenly burst out from the corner and quickly kill the gunman on the third floor, then rescue Kiki and escape. But that was not realistic. There were many gunmen on the other side. There were at least 5 or 6 people between him and the room. More importantly, Poplar Fruit did not know if there was someone in the room watching Kiki. If that was the case, Poplar Fruit might fail because he did not want to harm her. Damn it, damn it. Poplar Fruit wanted to bang his head against the wall. What should I do? There was a commotion, and the team leader outside suddenly shouted, "Come up and help me." It must be that bastard. It's okay, we have a hostage. We're not afraid of him. The cigarette addict still had some prestige in the team. Immediately, more than 10 people rushed up the stairs to the third floor, and the third floor became crowded. In this way, the chances of Poplar Fruit escaping were even slimmer. What should I do? Boss, ask our men to find him and kill him. One of the cigarette addict's henchmen shouted. The cigarette addict was very calm. He smiled sinisterly and said, "What are you afraid of? No matter how strong he is, he's just one person." How can that be? How is it possible for a single person to wipe out 6 branch? Someone questioned. It's definitely him alone. The cigarette addict said conceitedly. Do you think that I've spent so much time and effort to come up with a plan to feed pigs? He was tricked into coming to Myanmar by us. He definitely doesn't know about it. The cigarette addict said proudly. He's definitely the only one who can come here. Do you think those Chinese bastard cops dare to cross the border? Also, Naboo has been watching him for so long, and he's always been alone. How can he have other helpers? He's good at fighting, but don't be afraid. We have so many brothers. If each of us takes a bullet, he'll die 100 times over. The smoker boosted the morale of his men, and they gradually calmed down. However, even the heavy smoker was tired of staying on the crowded third floor. He waved his hand and shouted, "Go down, all of you. Bring the hostages, yes, the hostages to the first floor. I want to meet this young guy." Clang, a loud sound of the door opening. Yang Guo suddenly heard her daughter crying. It was very clear. The little girl cried and shouted with a somewhat hoarse voice, "You baddies, Grey Wolf, my papa and Pleasant Goat will defeat you. It's really my daughter." Poplar Fruit was happy and worried at the same time. He was happy because his daughter was crying. She should be fine, but he was worried about how he was going to save her. What should he do? Poplar Fruit's eyes unconsciously fell on the body of the drug addict next to him. Chapter 1369. Go, go. Go downstairs. What's there to be afraid of? We have more people. Amidst the clamor, Yang Guo could hear Chi-Chi's soft sobbing in the midst of the clamor. The little girl must be scared. The sobbing sound seemed to be amplified by a loudspeaker in Poplar Fruit's ears. It was so clear that Poplar Fruit's heart almost broke. However, even though Poplar Fruit was burning with anxiety at the moment, he could only force himself to calm down, because With a poochie sound, Poplar Fruit stabbed the meowdow in his hand into the back of a guy's heart. The blade came out of his chest, and the long blade had long been soaked in blood, looking so ferocious and terrible. The man didn't die immediately. His pupils dilated sharply and he still wanted to struggle, but his mouth and nose were covered by poplar fruit, and his head was firmly pressed down like an iron clamp, making him unable to scream or move. In the end, his hands that were pulling Poplar Fruit's fingers fell down weakly. The sixth one. Poplar Fruit gritted his teeth. His handsome face was a little ferocious at the moment, but his eyes were still terrifyingly calm. On his body, his previous clothes were gone. He didn't know when he changed into the attic's top. Of course, because it was a little short, he pulled up the black pants on his body to cover his navel, which looked funny. But the effect was very good. He was stupid and a little retarded. Poplar Fruit smeared some black and dirty oil on his face and skin, making him look more like a country bumpkin. Of course, compared to these real southern barbarian bandits, Poplar Fruit's 1.88 meters height was a little too tall. However, as long as he squatted down a little, and then put a cigarette in his ear, coupled with the messy stubble that he ignored because he was worried about his daughter, he almost perfectly transformed into a member of the other party. In the past, Poplar Fruit's acting skills were recognized as terrible, but at this time, perhaps because of the crisis, he showed the acting skills of a movie king. The frivolous and weak footsteps, the wretched temperament of a ruffian, and the silly look in his eyes when he looked at others made it impossible for anyone to connect the guy in front of them with the cultured and refined teacher Yang in school. It was precisely because of this disguise that Yang Guo was able to follow behind everyone. Along the way, she actually managed to secretly take care of 6 careless criminals. Some had their necks broken, some had their throats slit by him, and some had been stabbed in the back like just now. Fortunately, he killed 6 people and didn't attract the attention of the people in front. At first, he carefully dragged the corpses to hide behind some boxes, but after a few times, Poplar Fruit realized that the efficiency was too low, so he simply ignored it and kept following behind, killing one. But then, in the square downstairs, in public, it wasn't so easy. Poplar Fruit remembered that there were still a few people standing in the corridor on the second floor looking around. Poplar Fruit steeled his heart, turned around, and went upstairs to quickly kill them. There were more than 40 people downstairs, and they were noisy, waving their rifles and looking around. They didn't notice that their brothers upstairs had their necks twisted one by Poplar Fruit. It was as if they were still shouting and watching the show, but at some point, a pair of dirty hands suddenly reached out from the darkness behind them and instantly took their lives. Poplar Fruit even used ropes or belts to hang these dead people on nails or railings. Even their guns were under their arms. Up close, they were definitely exposed, but from downstairs, they didn't look carefully. Or from the dizzy eyes of the drug addicts, these brothers were still loyally standing guard for them. In fact, even the cigarette addict didn't notice. He raised his head, wanting to observe the situation in the factory. He was afraid that there would really be soldiers descending from the sky and killing them. However, he only saw that some people were standing upstairs, and some were even walking around. Some were even stretching and yawning, so he was relieved. But he didn't know that more than half of the brothers upstairs were already dead. Those who were still walking were just Poplar Fruit who hadn't had time to kill yet. However, the cigarette addict had a headache because his underlings were quarreling. The cigarette addict was the big boss, but he had a few underlings under him. Where there were people, there would be underworld. These people, together with their underlings, were divided into the Huaxia gang and the Guogan gang. As the name suggested, the Huaxia gang was made up of people from China, or people who had a strong ethnic background and could speak Chinese. The Guogan gang was mostly made up of locals from Guogan, and they used to be the main force of the gang. There were also some who didn't join these two gangs. For example, Nab wasn't from either gang. He was a farmer from another area who had come to mine. After being saved by the cigarette addict, he joined this small gang. However, these people were very few. Almost all of them were loyal to the cigarette addict and were his trusted subordinates. The main conflict was between the Huaxia gang and the Guogan gang. In the beginning, when the cigarette addict became the big boss, the Guogan gang was the main part of the gang. But over the years, first, it was the drug trafficking business. Then, it was the kidnapping business. The cigarette addict also intentionally or unintentionally sent the Guogan gang members to do dangerous business. Because of this, the number of Guogan gang members decreased. At the same time, the cigarette addict also recruited a large number of Chinese into his gang. This way, the Huaxia gang gained the advantage in terms of numbers. Of course, the cigarette addict was very secretive. This made the two remaining small bosses of the Guogan gang suspicious, but they didn't have any real evidence. There were many conflicts, but there were no real fights. This was all thanks to the cigarette addict's iron rule. However, the more he suppressed them, the greater the backlash. The Guogan gang members had been suppressing their anger towards the Huaxia gang for a long time. The cigarette addict was worried that this gang would become a ticking time bomb. If he was given a chance, he would definitely destroy this small gang of less than 20 people. Those who weren't part of the same gang had different intentions. Of course, the cigarette addict didn't plan to care about these grudges. He planned to leave after one hit. As for the Huaxia gang and the Guogan gang, if they wanted to fight, it was none of his business even if both sides suffered losses after he left. But was it really as he wished? They hadn't received the ransom yet, but these guys already felt that they were rich. Now, there was a lot of noise about the deaths of a few people. The Guogan gang accused the Huaxia gang that they were the ones keeping watch last night. They didn't take good care of the people and caused their brothers' deaths. The Huaxia gang mocked them by saying that their people deserved to die. They looked like they had a death wish. Their words were as ugly as they could be. This made the Guogan gang members, who were already angry, furious. They pulled the bolts of their guns, ready to fight to the death. The situation was about to descend into chaos. Chapter 1370. Ka-cha. Ka-cha. Even Yanghua, who was upstairs, was shocked. He poked his head out and looked down. He saw that the people downstairs were actually having an internal conflict. Poplar Fruit was not excited, because his daughter was tied to a chair. She was in the center of the storm with the leader of the gangsters. If they really fought, Kiki would be in danger. Yanggua's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. She almost wanted to jump down from the building. Although he was still the leader, the smoking man felt that the situation was getting out of control. After all, money could move people's hearts. These fellows actually dared to stand in front of him and start a fight. The smoking man felt like his chest was going to explode. Okay. Shut the fuck up. The smoking man suddenly took out his pistol and fired 2 shots at the ceiling. He turned around and grabbed a leader of the Huaxia gang behind him. Do you still respect me as your boss? He spoke in Burmese. Although it was awkward, everyone could hear him clearly. The few small leaders who had been arguing earlier all paused. Of course, they wouldn't shut up obediently. They were still cursing, but their voices all became softer. The person the smoking man chose to threaten was actually the leader he trusted the most. He used his trusted aide to put on a show, and it had the effect of killing the chicken to warn the monkey. Of course, the confidant that was threatened by him also felt the burning hot muzzle on his cheek, causing him to cry out in pain. Maybe this wasn't an act. Are you done? The smoking man lowered the muzzle and turned around to point at the 2 leaders of the Guogan gang. He asked sternly, if you're done, listen to me. Even now, the smoker still looked fearless. He was not afraid of the police. That was impossible. The Burmese border was not just for show. He was also not afraid of poplar fruit. After all, he had dozens of brothers with him, and there were people standing in the corridor upstairs to help watch. Even if poplar fruit was Superman, he would not be able to kill him. Therefore, he was leisurely and carefree. He planned to deal with the internal problems first and then deal with the external problems later. Of course, the smoker still didn't know that all his brothers on the second floor had been killed by poplar fruit. In total, poplar fruit had killed 17 people. That was more than a fifth of Smoker's lair. It had to be said that the drug had also worn away the sharpness and spirit of this drug lord whose name had resounded throughout central and northern China. "Heh, now that you have money, you don't treat me as your boss anymore, do you?" the smoker roared. No one dared to answer. After all, there were many people in this team who admired Smoking Ghost's reputation. Huaxia Gang and Guogan Gang dared to have conflicts with each other, but neither of them was willing to provoke this crazy boss who had once killed 3 traitors in front of everyone. "Don't forget where your money came from." Smoking Ghost patted his chest and said sternly, "It's all because of me. I'm willing to take only 2 million in cash. The remaining 100 million will be divided among you. I'll drink the soup while you eat the meat. Without me, you won't even have soup to drink." That was true. When Smoking Ghost came up with the plan, he was able to get everyone to work together because he had mentioned that he would distribute the money. As the main boss, he only took the smallest portion. That really broke all the records in Myanmar's military history. Of course, Smoking Ghost sneered in his heart. "You bunch of idiots. Do you think it's that easy to take poplar fruit's money?" Smoking Ghost understood China's system very well. For someone like Poplar Fruit who had won an award, his resources in China were not something that ordinary jade merchants could compare to. He believed that if he made such a request to transfer the money through the bank, the government would definitely track him down. Moreover, even if the money was deposited into the account, those idiots who didn't understand finance would never know how to launder the money through multiple overseas banks. When China put pressure on Myanmar, the money would definitely be frozen in Myanmar's banks. Not only would they not be able to withdraw the money, but they would also be hunted down. Therefore, not only did Smoking Ghost only want the 2 million in cash, he even pretended to be generous and asked for 10 of his subordinates' personal accounts. Smoking Ghost did not know whether they were real or not, but he knew that they were dead meat. "Don't worry, I don't want this money. When the money is paid, you can go to the bank and get the money. You can split it however you want." Smoking Ghost still remembered the admiration and fanaticism in his subordinates' eyes when he made his generous speech. Yes, the smoking addict wanted to trap everyone, including his trusted aides. He wanted them to be entangled with the police, and even let China and Myanmar eliminate these people together. Then, as the mastermind, he would escape with 2 million yuan and live a carefree life. What an idiot. Even now, they still respected him because of his generosity. The smoker cursed in secret and accepted the worship of these people without any shame. Smoking Ghost continued to threaten them. "Don't forget, as long as Poplar Fruit doesn't come and you don't get the money, all of you are still poor. If you want to fight now, go ahead and tell everyone that I don't want the money. Then, you can go outside and fight. If you want the money, stay and don't make a fuss." This time, even the people from Guogan Gang stopped making a fuss. "Isn't Poplar Fruit here?" Someone muttered and questioned. His voice was not loud, but because everyone was quiet, he could hear it clearly. "He's here. Where is he? Did you see him?" Smoking Ghost asked. He turned and walked over, smashing the underling's head with the butt of his gun. The underling's face turned red and he shouted, "If he's here, tell him to come out. Come out and we can split the money." Smoking Ghost's mind was not clear. In order to maintain his mental state and deal with Poplar Fruit last night, he had injected himself with an injection. The feeling of being admired was very good, and now that he was suddenly interrupted, he immediately became furious. Smoking Ghost's words were completely unreasonable. He did not know if he had forgotten, but he was actually the one who said that Poplar Fruit was here. But now, no one dared to question this big boss. They did not want to be humiliated. He didn't come, right? No one refuted, but there were many flatterers. Someone immediately jumped out and shouted, "I was on guard duty last night, and I didn't see a single rat." The people from Guagan Gang were furious. They thought to themselves, "It's fine if our boss is talking nonsense, but how dare you fool us?" However, the smoker's words made them stop and swallow their anger. "Fuck, you were on guard duty? Why didn't you stand outside? Why are you standing here?" He grabbed the guy's ear and yelled, "Do you want all of us to die with you? What the fuck? You're going to die with me, aren't you? Do you have any sense of hope? You're not even a professional thief. Are you a human or a pig?" Chapter 1371. To Poplar Fruit, it didn't matter how noisy it was downstairs, as long as they didn't fight and didn't threaten Kiki, who was like a little grass in a storm. However, what the smoker said next made Poplar Fruit, who was about to sneak downstairs into the crowd, nervous again. Let's not talk about what they were talking about. The situation downstairs had developed like this. "Boss, we're done with the night watch. It's dawn now, so we came back to sleep." The guy who had been beaten up by the smoker shouted in grievance. This time, he spoke in Mandarin and dragged a few of his buddies who had been on the night watch with him. The rest of them were depressed, but they didn't want to be beaten up, so they quickly nodded and didn't dare to say a word. Finished with the night watch? The smoker's confusion gradually faded, and his eyes became clearer. He asked in confusion, "Who's on the night watch now?" "No one's on the night watch," the guy said fearfully. When he saw the smoker's eyes widen, he quickly explained, "There's really no one to take over for us." He pointed at a leader of the Guagan Gang and shouted, "It's G. It's G's turn to be on the night watch. They're slacking off." It was always a good idea to divert his anger. Burmese people didn't have a surname. For example, Nabu was a name. G was a native of Guagan. He had a pair of vicious triangular eyes. When he saw the guy pointing at him, he immediately glared at him. Ever since he became a leader, everyone called him Wu Ji or Wu Ji. This person relied on the fact that he was the trusted aide of a small leader of the Chinese gang to disrespect him and even publicly set him up. Did he think that he didn't understand Mandarin? If the smoker wasn't here, he would have taken out his gun and shot this guy. However, he didn't dare to act rashly. He just snorted and said coldly, "The night watch was little 6 men. Now that everyone is dead, who's taking over for you? You, on the other hand, didn't seem to have anyone to take over your shift, so you came back to sleep. I don't even know if you really stayed overnight, or if you were just lazy and didn't go." After all, he was just a small leader. His ability to sow discord was not inferior to those old foxes in the officialdom. The man's face turned as red as blood. He said angrily, "You're the one who's fucking lazy." Before he could finish, the smoker roared again. "Enough. Shut up. Gee, he can't come back to life even if he's dead. Get 4 more people to keep watch. Don't waste our time." Oh no. Poplar Fruit retracted his foot that had just stepped out. He knew that if he wanted to keep watch, he would have to go through the stairs to the rooftop and the wall. And on the stairs, there were still 4 corpses lying haphazardly. The smoking addict had the right to call the leader by his name. G was also convinced. G lowered his eyes and nodded. He was about to find someone to keep watch. It was right to look at the big picture. However, someone didn't want him to have an easy time. A small leader of the Huaxia gang interfered. Boss, wait a minute. We can't let Ji's people keep watch. His tone was obvious. He didn't trust Ji and the Guogan gang. What do you mean? Ji wasn't the only one who was angry. His cronies behind him were also angry. This wasn't just sowing discord. He wanted the smoker to isolate them. Even the smoker was a little angry. He had just appeased both sides. I was wrong. What I meant was that Ji can't be on the lookout, right? It's such a sensitive time. The small leader refuted his words like a game. He didn't want to fall out with Ji now, so he said, sorry. Burmese is so awkward. He wasn't wrong. That was exactly what he meant. Looking at his smug smile, the guitars wanted to turn on him immediately. Sun Feng, what do you mean? The smoker narrowed his eyes and asked. We should at least ask a few people to keep watch, right? The small leader named Sun Feng smiled calmly. How about this? 1 person from each team, and 5 people will be on the lookout. That's a good idea. The small leaders of the Huaxia gang nodded. Although the guitars were angry, they couldn't do anything about it. Others were trying to sow discord, but they couldn't do anything about it. The smoker looked coldly at his subordinates who were fighting openly and secretly. He was too lazy to care about them. He said, okay, you guys go. It's important to keep watch. Don't delay us. Important my ass. They were so tired of fighting among themselves that they forgot about Poplar Fruit. Poplar Fruit was still in their building. Yang Guo was hiding the corpses, but he couldn't hide the bloodstains of the guy who was stabbed to death by his knife. As long as the 5 people weren't stupid, they would know that something big had happened when they saw the blood. He was so happy at that moment. Tomorrow, he would be cremated. Hearing the footsteps approaching, Poplar Fruit had an idea. He carried the body and walked down the stairs. What are you doing? The 5 people who were chosen to be on the lookout turned the corner and saw this scene. They suddenly became nervous. Of course, they didn't pull out their guns and scream. After all, Poplar Fruit looked like one of them. Poplar Fruit turned his head and grinned with his dirty face. He imitated the thick Burmese accent of those people and said, Hey, Leader Ji asked me to take Master Lu and the others down. Boss wants to see them. Needless to say, with Yang Guo's talent in language, she was able to imitate Guogan Gang's words to perfection. Even her intonation made them feel comfortable. Of course, this was only for the 2 members of Guogan Gang. But even the other 3 people didn't feel that there was anything wrong. They looked at Poplar Fruit with disdain and said with disgust, Go away, you barbarians are disgusting. Don't get your blood on me. Yang Guo had stumbled upon it by accident, because dead people were not uncommon in this place. Some died from illness, some died from fighting, and some died from their own consumption of powder. The dead were taken care of by the Burmese gang members. The Burmese gang sent the lowest-ranking person to do the dirty work. Everyone else avoided them. Even the Burmese gang members didn't suspect Poplar Fruit when they saw him. But Poplar Fruit was a Burmese gang member. He said the same thing as them. They could bully him, but others couldn't bully him. The Burmese gang members' words made the 2 Burmese gang members angry. Do you have a death wish? Say it again if you dare. Who is a barbarian? Humph, trash. You deserve to die. The 3 Burmese gang members didn't want to fall out with them here, because they were just small fries. They just muttered a few words in Chinese. Then they arrogantly turned around and walked upstairs. They didn't want to lower themselves to the same level as these barbarians. Chapter 1372. Seeing the 3 of them walk away, the 2 members of the Courage Gang snorted with a look of disdain. If it weren't for the fact that they were feeling a little guilty, they would have added insult to injury. Chinese people are cowards. Perhaps it was because they managed to get back at him. They were extremely pleased. One of them reached out and wanted to pat Poplar Fruit's shoulder, but when he saw how dirty Poplar Fruit was, the feeling of disgust rose in his heart again. His hand hung in the air, not knowing whether to pat or retract it. Poplar Fruit smiled foolishly at him. He did not dare to show his teeth because his teeth were so white that he did not look like a bandit's. However, it was this kind of silly smile that made the other party feel like he was an idiot who did not know anything. What was there to be embarrassed about with an idiot? The person calmly retracted his hand and did not hide the disgust in his eyes. He only said earnestly, "Do your job well." To the small bosses, they were small fries that had to be suppressed. However, to an idiot, how could they not enjoy the feeling of being above others? Even if it was the dirty and ugly Poplar Fruit, they would still be secretly pleased by the other party's admiring gaze. Poplar Fruit pretended to be grateful, then stood there and watched the other party walk upstairs. Why are you wasting time with this idiot? Above Man's companion said to him as he walked, not caring that his words were heard by Poplar Fruit. After all, he was an idiot too. What do you know? When I have money, I'll take him in as my little brother, Above Man said arrogantly. TSK, don't be gay, or else I won't dare to share a room with you. His companion joked. Tisk your balls. Even if I'm gay, I won't be interested in an idiot who plays with dead people and trash all day long. Above Man's voice gradually faded away. It seemed that he had already reached the third floor. Poplar Fruit remained in the same place. His innocent and confused eyes cleared up the moment the other party left. There was even a hint of mockery in the corner of his eyes. How reckless. Gently putting down the corpse in his hand, Poplar Fruit actually pulled out 2 hidden Miaodao from the other's clothes. The scabbard that could easily expose him had already been hidden by him. Poplar Fruit held 2 Miaodao in each hand. His hunched back straightened, and his entire person became unusually handsome. Even the determination emitted from his dashing eyebrows and starry eyes were like his unsheathed Miaodao, sharp and unstoppable. The Poplar Fruit's figure moved, and like a pine tree transforming into a willow catkin, he quietly floated out. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. On the first floor, the huge factory was still in a state of chaos. Of course, no matter how much they argued, they didn't really fight. The smoking addict looked at his subordinates, who were getting harder and harder to control. He wondered if he should teach them a lesson before he left. They would be consigned to eternal damnation. But gradually, the effects of the drug wore off, and his mind became sharper and clearer. At least, the figures were no longer layers of illusions. The smoking addict suddenly remembered something important. Right, they weren't in a hurry to fight with their own people. They should find Poplar Fruit as soon as possible and make him pay the ransom. Wait a minute. Why am I here? Isn't this the last scene of the plan? The smoking addict remembered. Right, someone died. That little 6 guy is dead. Did Poplar Fruit sneak in? Wait. The smoking addict's face darkened as he controlled the situation. He turned around and grabbed one of his more trusted subordinates. Tell me, that little 6 guy died. What's the reason behind it? His confidant was trembling in fear. He thought that the smoker was going to use this as an excuse to vent his anger and give him a hard time. Because he was scared, he couldn't explain clearly. Reporting to boss, we don't know how he died. But you said that he was killed by that fruit. I said that? Although the smoking addict's face was gloomy, he wasn't very violent now. He still rationally recalled what he said, but he was in a daze and couldn't remember anything. That's not right. Isn't Naboo watching that kid? He's missing, and Naboo didn't tell me? Do you think I'm a fool? The smoking addict began to speculate at this time. Everyone was a little speechless. He was the one who said it. The smoking addict looked around and suddenly realized that he was wrong. If it wasn't Poplar Fruit who sneaked in, who else could it be? But for Naboo, a subordinate that he personally sent out, a person that he trusted a lot because he rescued him, the smoking addict didn't think that Naboo would lie to him. The cigarette addict was actually a very intelligent person. However, his intelligence wasn't that of a wise person. Instead, it was a little bit of intelligence that he had built from the bottom of society. He was good at scheming and plotting, but sometimes, his way of thinking was too much of a conspiracy theory. Why was he so sure that it wasn't Poplar Fruit's doing now that he was sober? First of all, Naboo had indeed been tricking Poplar Fruit and sent back information on time according to the secret signal they agreed on. The last time he sent it was less than half an hour ago. It was also because of this that the smoking addict took the powder. He wanted to wake himself up after a sleepless night so that he could deal with the Poplar Fruit that he had fooled around with. Besides, even if Naboo was caught by accident, the smoking addict was 100% sure that Naboo, who was willing to die for him, wouldn't reveal the location of the factory they were in now even if they tortured him. The smoking addict didn't make so many preparations in vain. Including this factory, the smoking addict had led a large group of people to move out of their original mountain hideout and to this abandoned factory. The reason why it was abandoned was because it was only 12 kilometers away from the Chinese border. No one else would know about this choice of location. The smoking addict, who was very confident in his plan, didn't think that Poplar Fruit would be the culprit. If it wasn't Poplar Fruit, who could it be? The smoking addict rolled his eyes and looked at the Guagon gang, which only had 13 or 14 people left. Suddenly, his heart skipped a beat. However, the smoking addict couldn't say it out loud. He said in a low voice, "Call Naboo. If he's still in our hands, tell the 5 big wolves to give the address to Poplar Fruit. Our people are dead." Was it not Poplar Fruit who killed them? The 2 leaders of the Guagon gang looked at the smoking addict angrily and asked. 4 people from one branch died. Are we just going to let it go? Who killed them? This angry question was directed directly at the smoking addict, and there was no trace of respect in his tone. Enough. We'll talk about who killed them later. The smoking addict's eyes flashed with a trace of anger, but he didn't want to argue with the other party right now. He took a deep breath and said calmly, "Let's get the money first." Chapter 1373. The Guagon gang had been suppressed by the Huaxia gang under the Smoking Ghost's rule. Did they not want to fight back? Or did the 2 leaders, who had the support of their men, not want to kill the Smoking Ghost and take over his place? Perhaps not in the past, but over the years, the Smoking Ghost had used both kindness and power to suppress his subordinates. He had also led them to sell drugs and kidnap people to earn a lot of money. Success after success made most people, including the Guagon gang, blindly follow the Smoking Ghost. But now, it was different. 100 million worth of money was placed in front of everyone. Even the uncultured members of the Courage gang knew what this meant. The yuan was a common currency in small countries like Southeast Asia. Grandpa Ma once said, "Capital grows bolder when there is a suitable profit to be made." If there is a 10% profit, it will be used everywhere. If there is a 20% profit, it will be active. If there is a 50% profit, it will take risks. If there is a 100% profit, it will dare to trample all the laws of the world. If there is a 300% profit, it will dare to commit any crime, even at the risk of being executed. The same logic applied to the warlords and bandits. Even if the 100 million yuan was divided equally, everyone would gain more than 1,000,000 yuan. The money might not be able to do anything in China, but in a poor country like Myanmar, 1,000,000 yuan was a huge sum of money that could be used for a lifetime. Although the leaders only wanted cash and did not want a single cent of the 100 million yuan, it did not stop the Guogan gang from being greedy. If the 100 million yuan was divided equally, the Guogan gang would definitely get less. So, in private, the Guogan gang felt that the distribution plan was a little unfair. They had even gathered together these days to privately discuss a countermeasure without the main leader. But after all, they were uneducated and did not know anything about military strategy. Before they could figure out a countermeasure, they had already lost a lot of men. 4 of them died for no reason. No matter how they looked at it, it was a loss. Even if they only had 10 or 20 people left, they would not be able to withstand the Huaxia gang's bullying. The more they thought about it, the more they felt that something was wrong. However, they just couldn't figure out why. After Smoker gave the order, the Huaxia gang gave him face. Someone immediately gave Smoker a phone call. The Smoker waved his hand impatiently and said, "Beat him." Was there a need for the team leader to make a move for such a small matter? However, this little lackey immediately took the phone from his ear and looked at the team leader awkwardly. He didn't pick up. He pressed the button. The Smoker frowned and took the phone. Just as he was about to call Nab back, the phone screen lit up, and a message popped up. It was in Burmese. "Boss, I'm tracking someone. Call me back later." In the crowd, where the Guogan gang members were gathered, a criminal at the back of the crowd secretly stuffed his phone back into his pocket. If someone were to stand face to face with him, they would be surprised to find that the bandit in front of them had a pair of eyes as sharp as an eagle's. It was Poplar Fruit. He had changed into a new disguise. First, his clothes. Because the previous one was stained with blood, it was easily exposed. Therefore, this time, his clothes were much cleaner. Some of the simple decorations were taken from the 2 members of the Guogan gang who had just gone up. Poplar Fruit had already taken care of the 5 people who had gone up. They all went up from behind, not even giving them time to grab their guns. Poplar Fruit used his hands to break their necks. Of course, there was one person from the Huaxia gang in the end. Poplar Fruit used his gun with a silencer. There was no other way. The 3 people from the Huaxia gang were standing together, and it was difficult for Poplar Fruit to kill all 3 of them in one go. Because of his disguise and his low profile, Poplar Fruit secretly hid in the outermost part of the crowd. No one noticed that there was a new brother next to him. However, the smoking man's tactics made Poplar Fruit break out in a cold sweat. Fortunately, he had muted Nabu's phone. Poplar Fruit clenched his teeth and turned off the phone call from the other party. Then, he imitated Nabu's tone and sent a text message to the smoking man. He didn't know if it was effective because it had been more than half an hour since he came in. Logically, Nabu should have taken the initiative to contact the smoking man, but Nabu was long dead. Poplar Fruit had forgotten about it, so he didn't think about contacting him. However, Poplar Fruit secretly glanced at the middle of the field. It seemed to be effective. The smoking man believed it. When he saw the text message, he felt that Nabu was standing in front of him and talking to him alive. Poplar Fruit imitated him very well. Moreover, there was one thing that the smoking man didn't think was a problem. After running for half a night, he believed that even if Poplar Fruit was an Iron Man who knew Kung Fu, he should be exhausted. So, it didn't matter if he was late. The smoking man waved his hand and said calmly, "Okay, you don't have to bring Poplar Fruit anymore. Inform the 5 big wolves to send the factory's address to Poplar Fruit and ask him to come over." Poplar Fruit secretly let out a sigh of relief. However, it wasn't time for him to relax. This time, he had taken the risk to sneak into the factory hall on the 1st floor because he had a very clever idea to implement. Poplar Fruit's back and legs were slightly bent. He was rubbing his foot with a rifle that he had seized from an unlucky person, as if he was scratching an itch. At the same time, he lowered his head so that the other party couldn't see his face. Then, he muttered to the person next to him. Why do I feel that Brother Six's death has something to do with that stupid Chinese gang? They want us to all die, so that the rest of the money will be theirs. Poplar Fruit pretended to complain in a low voice. In fact, while he was killing, Poplar Fruit was listening to the various arguments downstairs. Of course, he wasn't gossiping. From these noises, he had figured out the habits of these people, including the rules of words, pronunciation, and address. Of course, only Poplar Fruit, who had a superb talent for language, could quickly grasp and imitate them. Now that he had spoken, the criminals next to him didn't treat him as an outsider. Instead, because of Poplar Fruit's casual complaint, his eyes lit up. Right, why didn't I think of this? He was also a low-level underling, but this didn't prevent him from angrily sharing this discovery with other people he was more familiar with. Almost everyone who heard this reasoning couldn't help but discuss it with the people next to them. Then, they all glared at the abominable Chinese. It was as if the ugly faces of the other party had become even more abominable. Chapter 1374. Poplar Fruit sowed the seeds of discord. Then, amidst these small fries' heated discussion, he casually waved his sleeves and quietly left without leaving a trace. Yes, he wanted to incite hatred between the two parties and cause chaos in this group of 40 to 50 bandits. This way, he would be able to fish in troubled waters and secretly rescue his daughter. Poplar Fruit changed his position and secretly stood behind the crowd, looking at Kiki, who was pitifully tied to a chair. The little fellow had become thinner. No one knew a daughter better than a father. Poplar Fruit acutely sensed that Kiki's face, which originally had a little baby fat, had really turned into an oval face after being kidnapped for 2 days. Unfortunately, her oval face wasn't beautiful. Her face was so pale that it had lost its original rosy luster. Seeing his daughter's thin appearance, Poplar Fruit almost couldn't hold back his tears. She must have refused to eat the bandits' food. After starving for 2 days, not to mention the discomfort of being tied up, Kiki was already on the verge of death from hunger. Even her frightened cries had become weak. Perhaps, when she was first brought down, Kiki's spirits were lifted when she heard the smoker confusedly say that her father was here. Then, she was full of hope that her father would be like a pleasant sheep, punching and kicking all these bad wolves away and then saving Kiki. Kiki was really full of hope, but her father didn't appear as she wished. Kiki could only lower her head and cry softly. The quarreling of the bad guys around her was as scary as lightning in Kiki's ears. Poplar Fruit looked at his daughter with great heartache. Not only was he afraid that his daughter's crying would hurt her body, but he was even more afraid that this would leave a psychological scar on Kiki because of this. But before that, Poplar Fruit had to think about how to save Kiki and not let her get hurt here. Poplar Fruit really had no choice but to use this method to sow discord between the two gangs. Both sides were at daggers drawn. If a fight really broke out, Poplar Fruit really didn't know if he could ensure that his daughter wouldn't get hurt. But if he didn't do this, both sides would unite under the smoker's mediation, and Poplar Fruit would have no chance. Poplar Fruit's hope was placed on the smoker, who he wished he could cut into pieces. As the leader, he should be able to stop the conflict between the two sides. Then, everyone would quarrel for a few more minutes. That way, Poplar Fruit could wait for reinforcements to arrive. Poplar Fruit had already contacted Hewenjua and the others. Hewenjua was also surprised by Poplar Fruit's unauthorized action and almost scolded Poplar Fruit. But because of this, Hewenjua and his teammates sped up and tried to shorten the time needed for reinforcements to arrive as much as possible. But Poplar Fruit never expected that the smoker wasn't as stupid as the other criminals. After arranging everything, the smoker, who was resting on an iron block, suddenly remembered something. The phone that he had received the text message from earlier wasn't the phone that he had used to contact Naboo. Because of the emergency, he hadn't brought that phone with him. After the smoker's after effects, his mind became clearer and clearer, and he had already regained his original wisdom. The more he thought about it, the more he broke out in cold sweat. No. Naboo couldn't have called him boss through someone else's phone. If Naboo had been instigated. No, Naboo couldn't have been instigated. If he had been caught. Then. Didn't that mean that they had lost their surveillance of poplar fruit? Then, someone died in the factory. Could it be, wait a minute, how did they know that my people were hiding here? Or, wait a little longer. If the person who died in the factory wasn't poplar fruit's doing, but the Chinese gang's doing, it didn't matter. But Naboo had indeed fallen into the hands of poplar fruit or his people, and they didn't know the final destination at first. But now, he had taken the initiative to send the message to the 5 wolves. The smoker took a deep breath and pondered, could it be? But the smoker faintly felt that it wasn't that simple. He wondered if he had missed something. That must be it. On the other side, the 2 leaders of the Guagan gang listened to their men's report, and their eyes widened as they slapped their thighs. No one went to find out who discovered this problem. Of course, even if they did, they wouldn't be able to find the mastermind behind the scenes, Yang Gua, who had mysteriously disappeared. Under the leadership of the 2 leaders of the Guagan gang, a group of people suddenly pulled the bolts of their guns and fiercely pointed them at the Chinese gang behind the smoker. Wait a minute, what are you doing? The smoker, who was still pondering over the clues, was scared out of his wits. If there was really an internal conflict, he wouldn't be able to hide in the middle of such a spacious factory. Team leader, you have to help us today. The 2 leaders of the Guagan gang saw that the other side had more than 20 guns, while they only had a dozen guns. They immediately lost their confidence and hurriedly looked for the smoker to ask for justice. Team leader, our people must have died because of these damn Chinese people. They shouted in grief and indignation, they must have wanted to take our money and secretly killed our people. That's right. The people behind them weren't afraid of death and were clamoring for revenge. Poplar Fruit's palms were sweating as they were about to lose control. He slowly moved forward, ready to jump forward and use his body to protect his daughter if he really opened fire. But the smoker seemed to be more nervous than him. He shouted angrily, "Are you stupid? Let me tell you, it must have been Poplar Fruit who did it. That's right, don't slander me. When did I kill your people? If I want to kill you, I'll kill you openly. There are only a few of you. If I open fire from upstairs and downstairs, I'll definitely kill you all." The Chinese gang members also shouted unhappily. They really hadn't done it, but they were also tempted. They also wanted to monopolize the 100 million yuan, but they didn't like being slandered like this. That's enough. Stop arguing. The smoker angrily took out 2 guns, one on the left and one on the right, and pointed them at the more prestigious leaders on both sides. He shouted, "Ji Sun Feng, take care of your people. If you make trouble again, I'll kill you too first." The Chinese gang was the first to back down, but Ji looked at the smoker angrily. He was affected by his emotions just now, and the more he thought about it, the more he felt that something was wrong. He shouted, "Team leader, are you still on their side? At first, you said it was Poplar Fruit who did it. Then, you said it wasn't him. Now, you're saying it again. Do you think we're fools? Do you think we can be fooled by you like this?" Ji's shout stirred up the emotions of the Guagan gang members. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Chapters YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.